It was just another quiet afternoon in Silicon Valley. The sun hung lazily in the sky, casting long shadows across the conference hall. Elon Musk, CEO of SpaceX and Tesla, had just finished delivering his keynote speech at a cutting-edge tech conference. As usual, the crowd was buzzing, eager to get a glimpse of the man who was changing the world, one bold idea at a time. Elon's mind was already racing ahead. New projects, plans for Mars, artificial intelligence, and the latest developments at Tesla. The excitement around him was almost overwhelming, but he was used to it by now. He slid his phone out of his pocket, glancing at a few unread messages, when something unusual happened. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? A small voice broke through the hum of the crowd. "Excuse me, Mr. Musk. Can I ask you a question?" Elon's head snapped up, and he squinted down at the source of the voice. Standing before him, barely above waist height, was a little girl, no more than 4 years old, wearing a bright yellow dress, her brown hair tied up in 2 playful pigtails. She looked up at him with a gaze that was surprisingly calm, almost knowing. He blinked, caught off guard. This wasn't your average child. In fact, she was the last person he expected to see at a tech conference like this. Sure, Elon replied, trying to hide his surprise. He knelt down to her level, feeling a strange curiosity bubbling inside. "What's your question?" The little girl didn't hesitate. "Do you want to see how rockets can be powered without fuel?" Elon paused. For a moment, he thought he had misheard. "Sorry, did you say rockets without fuel?" She nodded, her eyes wide and unblinking. "I've been working on a way to do it. My name is Emily. I'm 4, but I already know how to fix the environment and make space travel cheaper. It's really easy. I'll show you." Elon's eyebrows shot up. He had heard of child prodigies before, but this was something else. His mind raced, skeptical yet intrigued. Could a 4-year-old truly have ideas that could change the future of space travel? And why did she look so serious about it? "Okay, Emily," Elon said, deciding to humor her. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been so intrigued by someone so young. "How do you think rockets can be powered without fuel?" Emily took a deep breath, as if preparing for an adult-level conversation. Without missing a beat, she pointed to a nearby whiteboard covered with complex equations, as if it had always been there. "You use magnetic fields to ionize particles. When you manipulate those particles with the right energy field, you don't need fuel. It's like using a magnet to push things away, but in space, where there's no air." Elon stared at the whiteboard. His mind instantly began to analyze her words, trying to make sense of what she was saying. She was explaining a theory that was way beyond the capabilities of most adults, let alone someone so young. That's actually not wrong," he muttered, his voice almost inaudible. He looked around, half expecting someone to step in and tell him he was being pranked. But no one did. The room felt like it had frozen in place. All eyes were on Emily, who was casually scribbling more equations, her small fingers dancing across the board like she had done this 1,000 times before. "Wait, are you telling me you're actually—" Elon started, but Emily interrupted him, as if she already knew the direction of his thoughts. "Yes," she said confidently. "I'm going to help you build the first Mars colony, and I'll make sure it doesn't destroy the Earth." Elon's heart skipped a beat. Mars. That was always the goal. But this was something else entirely. A child, a 4-year-old, just casually stating that she had the answers to the very questions he'd spent years of his life trying to solve. The crowd around them started murmuring, their whispers filling the air. Some were confused. Others were utterly fascinated. "Hey, hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning," Elon said, almost to himself. He didn't know why he felt the need to say it, but something about Emily's certainty and brilliance made him think of the millions of people out there who believed in the impossible. "What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?" Emily smiled at him, as if she understood exactly what he meant. "I never give up," she said simply. The tension in the room was thick. People were still whispering, some pulling out their phones to record the scene. A 4-year-old child with an IQ that could rival the greatest minds of science. And Elon Musk, the visionary who had sent rockets into space and was actively working on making humanity a multiplanetary species, was looking at her as though she held the key to everything. Elon took a slow step back, his mind spinning. Was this real? Or was he dreaming? But then something inside him clicked. Maybe this was the spark he'd been waiting for. The thing that could change everything. "All right, Emily," he said, standing upright and looking at her seriously. "Tell you what, I want to see more of this. How about you and your mom come by SpaceX tomorrow? We'll take a look at what you're working on, and I'll introduce you to some of my engineers." Emily grinned. "I'll show you everything. You'll see." And just like that, Elon felt his life shift on its axis. A 4-year-old girl had just walked into his world and, in the space of a few moments, flipped everything he thought he knew upside down. As he turned to leave the conference, his mind raced with possibilities. A new era of space travel, one led by an unexpected prodigy. And perhaps, just perhaps, Emily was the key to something even greater than Mars. Elon was still processing the surreal encounter when he arrived at SpaceX headquarters the next day. His mind kept replaying Emily's words, her confident smile, and the way she spoke about space travel as if she were discussing the weather. But it wasn't just her ideas that intrigued him. It was her. Emily, the 4-year-old girl with an IQ of 230, had the kind of intellectual curiosity that made even the most seasoned scientists nervous. As Elon walked through the front doors of SpaceX, his thoughts were preoccupied with the potential implications of what had just happened. Could Emily actually help him achieve the dreams he'd been chasing for so long? He found himself in the conference room where Emily and her mother, Maria, were already seated, waiting for him. Maria looked every bit as overwhelmed as Elon felt. She was a small woman, with dark hair pulled back into a tight bun, and her face reflected a mixture of pride and concern. "Mr. Musk," Maria said with a slight smile, standing as Elon entered. "Thank you for meeting with us." Elon nodded, taking a seat across from them. Emily sat quietly next to her mother, her legs swinging back and forth under the table. She was dressed in the same yellow dress she'd worn yesterday, and her pigtails were now slightly askew from a night of sleep. Despite her childlike appearance, there was an intensity in her eyes that made her seem much older. "Please, call me Elon," he said, trying to put them at ease. He turned to Emily, who was already studying him with an almost analytical gaze. "So, Emily, I've been thinking a lot about what you said yesterday, about rockets powered without fuel. How did you come to think of that idea?" Emily didn't hesitate. "I was reading about magnetic propulsion," she said, her voice soft but steady. "And then I thought about how ionized particles can be manipulated in a vacuum. It seemed like a simple solution to me." Elon blinked, surprised at the ease with which she spoke about something so complex. His eyes flicked to Maria, who was watching him intently, perhaps searching for his reaction. "Reading about magnetic propulsion," Elon repeated slowly, his mind whirring. "You're 4 years old, and you read about this on your own?" Maria sighed, her face showing a hint of exasperation. "Yes, Emily has always been different. She was reading the periodic table at 2, and by the time she was 3, she was solving problems that took me weeks to understand. I thought it was just a phase, but it didn't stop." Elon leaned forward, intrigued. "How did this all start? Was there a moment when you realized Emily was, well, exceptional?" Maria paused, looking at her daughter with a mixture of affection and concern. "It was right after her 2nd birthday. We thought she was just a normal toddler until one day, she asked me about the stars. I didn't think much of it, but when I started explaining, she corrected me. And then, she explained the theory of relativity in a way that made sense to me." Elon's mouth went dry. The theory of relativity? He had been studying physics for decades, and even he didn't grasp some of the finer points. To think that a child had fully understood it and explained it so simply was mind-boggling. How is this even possible? Elon muttered under his breath, more to himself than to them. Maria looked at him with a weary expression. "I've spent every day trying to figure that out. She doesn't learn like other children. She doesn't need a teacher. She simply understands things as if they were always there, waiting for her to find them." Elon nodded slowly, trying to wrap his mind around what Maria was saying. He had met brilliant scientists, even geniuses, but Emily was different. She was something else entirely. "Do you mind if I take a look at the work you've been doing?" Elon asked, turning back to Emily. He felt the tension in the room lift slightly as she brightened. Emily smiled. "I'll show you everything." She hopped down from her chair and trotted over to a nearby table where she had set up a set of intricate drawings and calculations. She pushed aside a few toys, stacking blocks and a dollhouse, and revealed a series of blueprints, graphs, and notes that looked more like they belonged in a NASA lab than a preschool playroom. Elon picked up one of the papers, scanning through it. It was a detailed design for a propulsion system that used electromagnetism to generate thrust in space. There were notes on ionization rates, magnetic field strength, and even the energy requirements for maintaining the system. It was all written in shorthand, as if Emily had simply jotted down the basic concepts in a hurry. But Elon could see the brilliance behind it. He trailed off, struggling to find the right words. "This is amazing, Emily." Emily looked up at him with wide, proud eyes. "I think it could work. It should work." Elon sat back in his chair, his mind racing. This was beyond anything he had ever imagined. A child had designed something that could potentially revolutionize space travel. And she wasn't just a prodigy. Emily understood things at a level that most adults couldn't even dream of. "Okay," Elon said, his voice steady but filled with a sense of wonder. "I think we need to show this to some of the top engineers at SpaceX. But we're going to take it slow, okay? I want to make sure we do this right. No rush." Maria nodded, relieved. "Thank you, Elon. We don't want anyone to take advantage of her. She's still a little girl, and sometimes I forget how much pressure this puts on her." Elon's expression softened. "I understand. We'll be careful, I promise. But this is too big to ignore." Emily could change everything. As they wrapped up the meeting, Elon couldn't help but feel that his life had just taken a turn into the unknown. A 4-year-old girl with a mind capable of reshaping the future of space travel. He had always believed in pushing boundaries, in thinking outside the box. But Emily was rewriting the entire rulebook. As he walked out of the room, he knew that this was just the beginning. The world was about to change, and Emily, the little girl who saw space travel as something simple, would be at the center of it all. The following weeks were a blur. Elon was consumed by the whirlwind of Emily's genius and the growing curiosity about her ideas. After the meeting at SpaceX, he arranged for her and Maria to meet with the top engineers, hoping they could help turn Emily's designs into something tangible. But the excitement soon collided with resistance. It wasn't long before Elon's team began to question the feasibility of Emily's ideas. Despite their brilliance, Emily's concepts were unconventional, and many of the engineers were hesitant to embrace the possibility of a 4-year-old girl rewriting the rules of space technology. On a crisp Friday morning, Elon sat in a meeting room with some of the senior engineers, including Tom, one of SpaceX's most trusted experts in propulsion systems. Elon had made sure to bring Emily and Maria along, hoping their presence would sway the conversation. "So, Elon," Tom began, his tone carefully neutral, "we've gone over Emily's designs. To put it bluntly, they're untested. The calculations she's using, while impressive, don't align with any known principles of physics as we understand them." He glanced at Emily, who was sitting at the table, drawing circles with a marker on the whiteboard. "Not that I'm dismissing her brilliance, but we're talking about creating a propulsion system that could change everything, and frankly, there's a lot at stake here." Elon leaned forward, his gaze focused on Tom. "I understand, Tom. But what if she's right? What if the conventional principles we've relied on are limiting us, and Emily's idea is what we've been waiting for?" Tom shook his head. "I've spent years in this field, Elon. The laws of physics haven't changed in centuries. We can't just throw them out the window because a 4-year-old with an IQ of 230 tells us to." Elon's eyes narrowed. "Do you remember when we first started working on reusable rockets? Everyone said that was impossible too. Remember when they laughed at us for wanting to land a rocket upright? They said it couldn't be done, yet here we are, launching rockets and bringing them back to Earth." Tom paused, visibly irritated. "This is different. This is not just about engineering. It's about science that..." Is unexplored for a reason? Elon interrupted, his voice calm but firm. I get it, Tom. The unknown is scary. But what if it's the breakthrough we need? At that moment, Emily stood up from the whiteboard, holding out her marker to Elon. She looked at him expectantly, her face free of any trace of doubt. I can show you how it works. I've already figured it out. You just need to trust me. Elon looked at the engineers in the room, who were watching Emily warily. He could tell that not all of them were convinced, but they weren't dismissing her either. The tension was palpable. Emily's confidence, though, was undeniable. Elon, Maria said quietly, placing a hand on his arm. I know it's hard to believe, but she's been like this her whole life. She doesn't just know things. She sees them, like they're already real. Elon took a deep breath, trying to calm the growing tension. He knew that if they were going to make this work, they needed to move forward carefully, but with an open mind. All right, he said, glancing around the room. Let's do it. Let's see where this takes us. The next few days were a whirlwind of brainstorming and exploration. Emily's drawings were turned into rough models, and the engineers at SpaceX began to experiment with the principles she had laid out. Elon watched from the sidelines, fascinated by the speed with which Emily's ideas were coming to life, yet still unsure whether they could pull it off. During one of their sessions, Emily and the team set up a small-scale test of the propulsion system she had described. It was the first real attempt to test her theory in any tangible way. The setup was simple: a small metal chamber, a magnetic field generator, and ionized particles. It wasn't much, just a prototype, but it was a start. As the team activated the system, the room fell silent. Everyone's eyes were locked on the small chamber, waiting for something, anything, to happen. And then, to their shock, a faint but unmistakable hum filled the air. A small burst of energy shot through the chamber, causing the metal to vibrate slightly. Emily's eyes lit up. See, she said, a triumphant smile crossing her face. It works. The engineers exchanged surprised glances. They had expected something, but not this. The propulsion system had actually generated a small but noticeable amount of thrust, just enough to show that it was possible. Tom, looking both stunned and reluctant, rubbed his eyes. I can't believe it. This is impossible. How did she? Elon raised his hand, silencing him. Maybe it's not impossible. Maybe we've just been looking at the wrong thing all along. Emily, beaming with pride, turned to her mother. I told you it would work. Maria smiled, a mix of relief and disbelief on her face. I know you did, sweetheart. I know you did. As the testing progressed, something unexpected happened. Tom, the senior engineer who had been the most skeptical about Emily's theories, became increasingly intrigued. His doubts, though not completely gone, started to fade as the small-scale experiments began to yield more positive results. One afternoon, after a long day of work, Tom pulled Elon aside. You know, he said, his voice quieter than usual, I've spent the better part of my career thinking that this was all about following the rules. But watching Emily, she's challenging everything I thought I knew. Elon gave him a wry smile. Welcome to the future. Emily's not bound by the same limitations we are. Tom let out a frustrated sigh. I never thought I'd say this, but I think we need to follow her lead. Elon's grin widened. That's what I've been trying to tell everyone. Despite their success, not everyone was ready to accept Emily's ideas so readily. Some engineers were still skeptical, and there were even concerns about how much publicity they should give Emily. Maria, especially, was becoming more protective of her daughter as the spotlight grew brighter. One evening, as they sat in the cafeteria at SpaceX, Maria expressed her fears to Elon. Elon, I appreciate everything you're doing, but I'm scared. Emily's still a little girl. She doesn't understand what all this attention means, and I don't know how much longer we can shield her from the pressure. Elon nodded, understanding the concern. I get it. It's a lot for her to handle, but she's stronger than you think, and the world needs to see what she can do. Maria looked at him, a mix of worry and exhaustion in her eyes. But she's not just a genius. She's my daughter, and I don't want the world to crush her spirit. I won't let that happen, Elon said, his voice steady. We'll take it slow, one step at a time. As the days turned into weeks, Emily's designs continued to evolve, her ideas pushing SpaceX to new frontiers. With every challenge and every victory, Elon began to understand that this wasn't just about creating a new propulsion system. It was about trusting in something bigger than technology. It was about believing in the impossible. Elon Musk stood at the window of his office at SpaceX, staring out over the sprawling complex. The excitement was palpable. Something big was on the horizon, and the quiet hum of progress was in the air. But even as the work continued to accelerate, there was a growing undercurrent of tension. Emily's ideas were challenging everything the team thought they knew about propulsion systems, space travel, and even physics. The resistance was not only coming from outside SpaceX, but also from within. The engineers had made progress, but it wasn't fast enough. There were still doubts, questions, and a growing sense that they were attempting to push the boundaries of possibility without a clear understanding of the fundamental science behind it. Despite the successful small-scale tests, they had yet to create a fully operational prototype that could demonstrate the system's true potential. Elon sighed. It was like being on the edge of something revolutionary, but there was a nagging feeling that they were teetering too close to the edge. What if it didn't work? What if Emily's theory, no matter how brilliant, was just a lucky guess? He turned to his desk, pulling up the latest test data on his tablet. The magnetic propulsion system, as Emily had explained, was beginning to show promise. Yet, something about the way the data fluctuated unsettled him. The small-scale test had demonstrated minor thrust, but the energy output was inconsistent. It worked one moment, then failed the next. Even the best engineers on his team had no clear answers. He was interrupted by a knock on the door. Maria entered, her face calm but holding a trace of concern. Emily was not with her today, which was unusual. She usually had her daughter with her, sitting at a corner of the office, quietly sketching out her designs. "Is everything okay?" Elon asked, noticing the slight weariness in Maria's eyes. She sat down across from him, looking at the tablet in his hands. "Elon, I need to talk to you about something. It's about Emily." Elon set the tablet down, focusing on her. "What's going on?" Maria took a deep breath. "I think we're pushing her too hard. She's 4 years old, Elon. This pressure, it's starting to get to her. I can see it. She's starting to pull away." Elon felt a pang of guilt. He had been so focused on the potential of Emily's ideas that he had overlooked the human element. The little girl who had walked into SpaceX with bright eyes and big dreams was, at the end of the day, still a child. And no matter how brilliant she was, no child should be thrust into a world of high expectations and constant scrutiny. "I've noticed it too," Elon admitted. "She's not as bubbly as she used to be, and she's withdrawn from the other kids in the playgroup. I didn't realize how much of a toll this was taking on her." Maria's eyes softened. She doesn't understand why people keep asking her questions she can't answer. She doesn't understand why her drawings and ideas are being dissected like there's some kind of scientific breakthrough. It's too much for her. Elon sat back in his chair, lost in thought. Maria was right. Emily's brilliance was extraordinary, but it wasn't fair to treat her like a miniature adult, to push her toward goals and expectations that were simply too much for a child her age to handle. "Maybe I've been too focused on the end goal," Elon said quietly. "I see the potential, the future, but I forgot about what she needs right now. She's a child, not a machine." Maria nodded, her lips tight with worry. "I just want her to be happy. I don't want her to feel like she's carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders." Elon's mind was racing. He needed to find a way to balance Emily's incredible talents with her need for childhood. The pressure on her had to ease, but they couldn't just stop the work altogether. He had no doubt that Emily was on the verge of something world-changing, and that was something he couldn't ignore. But he also knew that if they didn't protect her, if they didn't shield her from the emotional toll of all this, everything could fall apart. "I'll talk to her," Elon said, determination in his voice. "We'll slow down the testing for now. I'll make sure she gets time to be a kid again. We need to find that balance." Over the following weeks, Elon did his best to slow down the pace of Emily's involvement in the experiments. The engineers worked quietly in the background, refining the propulsion system without the constant pressure to achieve immediate results. Emily, for her part, spent more time drawing, playing with her toys, and interacting with other children her age. Activities that seemed to bring her joy. But even as they tried to protect her from the pressure, there was another looming challenge. The world was starting to take notice of the strange little girl with the genius IQ, and the media frenzy was building. One morning, a story broke on several major tech websites. The headline read, "Meet Emily, the 4-year-old girl who may revolutionize space travel." The article described her theories, her meeting with Elon Musk, and the potential of her ideas. It was a glowing piece that emphasized her intelligence and potential, but it also highlighted her youth in a way that felt uncomfortable. Emily's face was plastered across social media, and people began calling her the next big thing. At first, Elon was excited. This was the kind of attention that could push their work forward, attract more resources, and perhaps even attract a new generation of scientists and thinkers. But as the days went by, the situation grew more complicated. Reporters began camped outside SpaceX headquarters, demanding interviews and statements. The pressure on Emily, and by extension on Maria, was mounting. One afternoon, as Elon walked through the lobby of SpaceX, he was stopped by one of the public relations managers, her face tense with anxiety. "Elon, you've got to see this," she said, showing him her phone. The screen displayed a viral video of Emily, looking overwhelmed and confused, being interviewed by a popular news anchor. The reporter, while friendly, was asking her difficult, complex questions about her theories and their real-world applications. In the video, Emily seemed uncomfortable, shifting in her seat, her small hands clenched in her lap. She wasn't speaking as confidently as she had in their early meetings. Her brilliance was still there, but the pressure was evident. The camera zoomed in on her face as she hesitated to answer, clearly feeling the weight of the questions. The headline beneath the video read, "The young genius who can't handle the spotlight." Elon's stomach sank. He knew this wasn't what he wanted. He didn't want to exploit Emily's genius, especially not at the cost of her childhood. He had to put a stop to this, or they would lose the very thing that made Emily special. The purity of her intellect, her curiosity, and her joy for discovery. That evening, Elon called Maria to arrange a meeting. He knew that he had to make some changes if they were going to protect Emily and her future. "I've made a decision," he said as soon as Maria arrived at his office. "We're going to scale back the public exposure. We'll stop the media from running wild with her story. No more interviews, no more cameras. I want her to feel like a child again, not a circus act." Maria looked relieved. "Thank you, Elon. I've been so scared for her. I don't know how much more she can take." "I know," Elon said quietly. "I know. I promise we're going to do this the right way. I'll protect her from the chaos, and we'll continue the work, but at a pace that respects her childhood." Maria nodded, a grateful smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I knew you'd understand." And as they sat together in the office, planning the next steps for Emily's involvement in SpaceX, Elon realized that this wasn't just about pushing the boundaries of space travel. It was about protecting the spirit of discovery, the heart of what made Emily who she was, before the world turned her into something else entirely. The weeks following the media frenzy were both quieter and more intense than Elon could have imagined. SpaceX had successfully pulled back from the public eye, canceling scheduled interviews and limiting Emily's exposure to the media. The team returned to their work, pushing forward with the propulsion project in the hopes of refining Emily's designs. Yet the pressure wasn't just external. Inside the company, things were beginning to fray at the edges. Elon had worked hard to keep a low profile for Emily, but the silence in the media only seemed to fuel speculation. Journalists continued to stalk SpaceX's headquarters, trying to catch a glimpse of the young genius who could supposedly revolutionize space travel. But the more Elon withdrew, the more the scientific community and the public seemed to demand answers. Some were eager to see the groundbreaking technology come to life. Others were skeptical and dismissive. And then there was the growing whisper campaign, an undercurrent of doubt within SpaceX itself. "I don't care how smart she is," Tom, the senior engineer, had grumbled one afternoon in the break room, his voice tinged with frustration. "The kid's 4 years old. She's got a lot of great ideas, but we're talking about things that defy the laws of physics. She can't just sketch a few diagrams and change everything overnight." We need to test this stuff properly before we get too far. Elon, who had been standing nearby, overheard the conversation and couldn't ignore the growing discontent in the ranks. He knew Tom's concerns weren't entirely unfounded. It wasn't just about belief in Emily, it was about credibility. The scientific community was beginning to push back against the concept of a preschooler turning the field of space exploration on its head. The higher the stakes, the bigger the target SpaceX and Emily became. But it was one thing to face skepticism from outside, and another to face it from within his own team. Elon entered the engineering floor that afternoon, where a group of the more senior members of the team were gathered. The usual energy of possibility was dampened, replaced by a sense of tension that seemed to hang in the air like static electricity. As he approached the group, he could hear snippets of conversation. "I just don't see how this is going to work," one engineer muttered. "You can't make a quantum leap in propulsion without a working model. The math doesn't add up," another engineer chimed in. "We've tried adjusting the formulas she suggested, but how do you even put this? They're just wrong. Or at least, they don't make sense according to what we know." Elon raised his hand, silencing the group. "I understand the concerns, but here's the thing. Emily's theories may not fit into what we already know, but they've worked so far. These engineers are creating small-scale prototypes based on her work, and they've shown promise. It's not about whether the formula is conventional, it's about pushing beyond the known. This is the same thing we've done with reusable rockets. The impossible becomes possible when we challenge assumptions." Tom, standing off to the side, crossed his arms. "Elon, you're right. We've done the impossible before. But this is different. You're asking us to bend, or even break the rules of physics. I get it. We want to make history. But sometimes you just have to accept that certain things are impossible." The silence that followed his words was thick. Elon felt the familiar rush of frustration rising in him. But instead of letting it spill out as it sometimes did, he took a deep breath and steadied his mind. Maybe we've been wrong about what's possible. Maybe it's not about bending the rules of physics, but about discovering new rules entirely. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each engineer. "You've been here because you believe in what's next. We are on the cusp of something revolutionary. We are on the verge of changing the course of human history. Do you want to be the ones who missed it?" The room was silent for a long moment, the weight of his words settling in. Tom didn't respond immediately, but his stance softened slightly. The engineers exchanged uneasy glances, but something in Elon's words seemed to spark a flicker of hope, or at least curiosity, in the group. Finally, Tom spoke. "All right, let's see where it goes. But if this doesn't pan out, we don't want to be the ones left holding the bag when we've committed millions to something that doesn't work." Elon gave a nod, his expression serious but resolute. "I hear you. Let's proceed with caution, but let's also proceed with boldness. We'll make sure we're thorough. No shortcuts. But we're not backing down. We're all in this together." The next few weeks were a blend of intense work and careful planning. Emily continued to sketch out her designs and spent time working with the engineers to refine the theory. While she wasn't involved in every aspect of the work, she did act as a source of inspiration for the team. Her brilliance was undeniable, even if the team was still struggling to fully understand how to make her concepts a reality. Then, one day, something extraordinary happened. It was a Wednesday, and the team was gathered around a new propulsion chamber they had constructed based on Emily's designs. They had been tweaking the magnetic fields, testing new materials, and adjusting their calculations. It was a risky move, but they were ready to see if the propulsion system could finally function on a larger scale. Maria and Emily were both there, standing off to the side, observing the setup. Emily's small frame, dwarfed by the complex machinery around her, looked out of place. Yet in this high-tech environment, she was right at home. Elon stood beside her, watching as the countdown began on the large display screen. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The switch was flipped, and the chamber hummed to life. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The engineers held their breath, looking at the readings on their monitors. Emily's eyes were fixed on the machinery, her expression completely focused. And then it happened. A small burst of light shot from the chamber, followed by a low, powerful hum that reverberated through the walls. The propulsion system was functioning. But it wasn't just working. It was working better than they had anticipated. The system produced more thrust than any of the team had expected, and it was stable. The test results, though preliminary, suggested that Emily's designs might actually work on a large scale. They were crossing into the realm of breakthrough technology. The engineers erupted into cheers, but Elon's attention was entirely on Emily. She stood there, calm as ever, her eyes wide with excitement but not surprise. "It's just the beginning," she said softly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "We can do more." Elon's heart raced. This wasn't just a small achievement. This was the start of something monumental. A new era of space exploration had just begun. But it wasn't just the propulsion system that had caught their attention. It was Emily herself. As she spoke, her words were as measured and confident as the most seasoned engineer, despite her age. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. She knew this was just the beginning. Later that day, Elon found himself in his office, staring at the data again. The propulsion system had worked. It had far exceeded their expectations. But now, more than ever, he felt the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. Emily's life had already been irrevocably altered by the publicity, the pressure, and the growing attention from the world. And as much as he was thrilled by the breakthrough, he knew they couldn't continue down this path without more careful consideration. He made a decision. Emily would take a step back from the project, for now. It was time for the team to take the next steps without putting too much on her young shoulders. The world could wait. Emily's future, her childhood, could not. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the SpaceX campus began to empty out, Elon found himself in the quiet of his office, reflecting on how far they had come. The breakthrough was monumental, but the journey ahead would be even more complicated. They had only scratched the surface of what was possible. But with Emily's vision, they had the spark of something incredible. And as the world waited for the next chapter of this story, Elon Musk knew one thing for sure. The impossible was no longer out of reach. The ripple effect from the propulsion breakthrough was immediate and intense. SpaceX had just witnessed the impossible becoming possible, but now the world was watching. And with it came a tidal wave of expectations. The implications of the propulsion system were far-reaching, and the pressure was mounting from every direction. While some were cheering on the young prodigy, others saw the discovery as a threat to the status quo. Elon had never been one to shy away from pressure, but this time it felt different. It wasn't just about space exploration anymore. It was about managing a genius who was still a child and balancing the weight of the entire world on her tiny shoulders. Emily had done something remarkable, but the question was now, what would they do with it? By the end of the week, the media storm had reached unprecedented levels. Headlines around the world were calling Emily the girl who will change space forever. Articles ranged from adoringly praising her genius to wildly speculating on her future. The child prodigy who could replace Musk, and is this 4-year-old the next Einstein of space? The pressure from the media was unlike anything SpaceX had ever experienced. Cameras, microphones, and reporters began to infiltrate every public appearance, every interview, every meeting. The public wanted answers, and they wanted them now. Elon knew that they couldn't keep Emily out of the limelight forever. The breakthrough was just too big. But he also understood that Emily wasn't ready for the chaos surrounding her. Despite her precociousness, the weight of this newfound fame was already taking a toll on her. She had stopped drawing as much and had started to ask fewer questions, her eyes clouded with a fatigue that only a child under constant scrutiny could feel. That afternoon, as he reviewed a media report from one of the major networks, Elon found himself pacing in his office. A text message from Maria popped up on his phone. She's asking why they keep calling her a genius. She doesn't understand what they mean. Elon's heart tightened. Emily had never been one for praise or recognition. To her, it was simply about the ideas, the knowledge, the excitement of discovery. But now, she was being treated like a spectacle. The constant questions, the camera flashes, the weight of expectations. Was it really worth it? His phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from NASA. NASA had been closely monitoring SpaceX's progress for years. But now that Emily had created a real-world breakthrough, they were eager to get involved. It wasn't just about space travel anymore. It was about military technology, global dominance, and the future of energy production. They were calling to discuss potential collaboration, but it was clear their interests were far more complicated than simple scientific exploration. Mr. Musk, the voice on the other end, was smooth, professional, but with a touch of urgency. We've reviewed the preliminary data on the propulsion system. It's impressive, to say the least, and we're interested in discussing the possibilities for joint development. We're talking about securing a position in the space race, and, perhaps more importantly, we're thinking about how we can leverage this technology for national security. Elon paused, feeling a tightening in his chest. He had always known that the military-industrial complex had its eyes on the stars, but hearing it out loud was a different story. He couldn't shake the feeling that this conversation was less about exploration and more about control. Of course, we're happy to share the data with you, Elon replied carefully, but I have to make one thing clear. This project is about pushing humanity forward, not about any one nation's dominance. There was a brief silence on the other end before the voice responded, more measured now. Understood. But we must be realistic. Space is no longer a domain for exploration alone. We need to consider the strategic benefits. Elon sighed, the weight of the conversation sinking in. He had always been an advocate for space as a platform for progress, for cooperation between nations, but he knew this breakthrough would bring more than just scientific curiosity. The military would want a piece of it, and that would put everyone involved under an intense microscope. I'll take your proposal into consideration, Elon said, ending the call. His thoughts were clouded. While he didn't want to give in to military demands, the collaboration could provide the funding and resources needed to advance Emily's ideas on a global scale. Still, the cost was steep, especially if Emily's innocence and vision became tainted by these forces. Later that evening, Elon found himself alone in his office again, the weight of the day's decisions pressing on him. As he sat, staring out over the SpaceX campus, his thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. It was Maria, her face pale with concern. Elon, we need to talk. Elon stood and motioned for her to sit. What's on your mind? It's Emily, Maria said quietly, her voice breaking slightly. She's withdrawn. She doesn't want to talk to anyone. She's barely eating. And when I asked her why, she just said, she doesn't want to be a genius anymore. Elon felt a sinking feeling in his chest. He had known this was coming, but hearing it out loud was a painful reminder of the cost of pushing the boundaries so quickly. Emily had been thrust into a world she wasn't ready for, a world that had seen her as a tool, a commodity, not a child. He had never intended for her to feel this way. Maybe we've pushed too hard, Maria continued. She was fine when it was just us. But now I don't know who she is anymore. Elon felt the sharp pang of guilt. Maria was right. They had all let the pressure build too quickly. The breakthrough, the media attention, NASA's interest. It had all been overwhelming for a child, even one as extraordinary as Emily. We'll slow things down, Elon said firmly. No more interviews. No more pressure. I'll make sure she gets a break from all this. We need to protect her, not just her mind, but her childhood. Maria nodded, tears threatening to spill over. Thank you. I just want her to be happy again. The following day, Elon made a bold decision. He called an emergency meeting with his executive team, including key members of the engineering and PR departments. They needed to reassess the direction of their work with Emily. I want the media blackout to be permanent for now, Elon began. No more press conferences. No more appearances. If anyone contacts us for interviews or comments, we will refuse. Emily needs time to breathe. Time to be a child again. This project will move forward, but without the spectacle. There was a murmur of agreement around the room, but a few raised eyebrows. Are you sure about this, Elon? Tom, the senior engineer, asked. I mean, we've got the propulsion working. The world is watching. This is our moment. We can't just disappear into the shadows. I know the stakes, Elon replied, but we've lost sight of what matters. This project was never just about the technology. It was about pushing humanity forward. That can't happen if we sacrifice the people behind it. We protect Emily, and the technology will follow. If we can't balance that, we're not doing this right. The team nodded, their faces reflecting a mix of understanding and reluctance. They all knew the gravity of the decision, but they also understood Elon's resolve. As the meeting concluded, Elon felt a quiet sense of relief. The path forward would be difficult, but it was the right one. They had to rebuild their approach, slowly, carefully, with a focus on Emily's well-being above all. And as the team dispersed, he couldn't help but wonder how long they could hold back the tide of interest that was building outside their doors. But for now, at least, the most important thing was to protect Emily. The rest could wait. The next few months would be crucial. The propulsion system was on the brink of becoming something far more powerful than anyone had imagined. But behind the scenes, SpaceX was navigating the delicate balance between progress and preservation. They had to fight the urge to rush forward at full speed, even as the world demanded answers. And for Emily, it was a time of retreat. The media frenzy was subdued, but the pressure would never fully disappear. As the world's attention shifted elsewhere, Elon and his team would continue to build, and Emily would continue to grow. Hopefully, into the genius she was meant to be, without the weight of the world on her small shoulders. As the weeks turned into months, the buzz surrounding Emily's discovery began to simmer down, but the pressure never fully dissipated. Elon had managed to pull the team back from the brink, giving them the space they needed to breathe and recalibrate. The media frenzy, while still lingering, was no longer a constant shadow. Yet, a different kind of pressure was slowly creeping in, one that was far more insidious and personal. Emily's demeanor had changed. Once an eager participant in the world of discovery, she had become quieter, more withdrawn. She spent hours at her drawing board, sketching intricate designs and equations, but it wasn't the same. The spark that had once radiated from her like a star was beginning to dim. It was subtle at first, an occasional sigh or a distant look, but it didn't take long for those closest to her to notice. One evening, Elon stood by the window in his office, gazing out over the SpaceX campus. The sunset was painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The propulsion system was progressing, albeit slower than expected, but Emily wasn't. He had done everything he could think of to protect her, to give her the space she needed, but it didn't seem to be enough. Maria's voice broke his reverie, and he turned to find her standing in the doorway, her face tight with concern. "Elon, it's getting worse," she said softly. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He'd been hoping he was wrong, that he was overthinking things. But seeing the worry etched on Maria's face made his own doubts solidify. "Worse?" Elon echoed, his voice low. He motioned for her to sit. "What do you mean?" "She's not herself," Maria explained, sitting down across from him. "I've tried everything, reading, games, even just talking. She's not responding like she used to. She's almost like a shell of who she was before. It's like she's lost interest in everything." Elon rubbed his temples, the weight of it all crashing down on him. He had known it wasn't sustainable for Emily to stay out of the public eye indefinitely, but he'd hoped that the downtime would allow her to recover, to feel normal again. He had underestimated the toll that fame had taken on her, even in the quiet of SpaceX's headquarters. "Has she said anything about what's bothering her?" Elon asked, his voice tinged with worry. Maria shook her head. "She doesn't talk about it. She just draws. Stares at her drawings all day, as if they're the only things that make sense to her anymore. And when I try to ask her about the propulsion system or the work we're doing, she clams up, like it's too much." Elon leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. The world was demanding progress. SpaceX was on the verge of something unprecedented, something that could change everything. But at what cost? He had always prided himself on his ability to balance innovation with practicality, to push the limits of possibility while ensuring his team's well-being. But with Emily, it felt different. This wasn't just about technology. It was about a child, his child, in a way, whose brilliance had far outpaced her years, and whose innocence was being crushed under the weight of the world's expectations. "I think we need to pull back even more," Elon said finally, his voice steady but filled with a sense of determination. "We've kept her out of the public eye, but it's still too much. I need to get her away from here for a while, somewhere she can just be." Maria looked at him, her eyes filled with both relief and hesitation. "You think that'll help?" "It has to," Elon replied. "She needs to feel like a child again. The propulsion system, the media, the pressure. It's all too much. We need to give her time to reconnect with herself. I'll take her somewhere far away from all of this." A few days later, Elon and Maria packed Emily's things and set off for a secluded cabin in the mountains, a place that Elon had visited once before. It was a rustic retreat, far from the prying eyes of the world. The kind of place where time seemed to slow down. They hadn't told anyone where they were going. There were no press releases, no media statements. For the first time in months, Emily was going to have a chance to breathe. The cabin was small but cozy, nestled at the base of a sprawling forest. The sound of a nearby river rushing over rocks filled the air, mixing with the calls of birds and the rustle of leaves. It was peaceful, the kind of serenity that Emily hadn't known in months. At first, it was difficult. Emily was quiet and unsure, her eyes scanning the surroundings as if trying to find something familiar in the vast expanse of nature. She wasn't used to the stillness, but over time, the tranquility began to work its magic. She wandered the property, touching the trees, collecting rocks, and watching the river flow. She began to speak again, though softly, and mostly to herself. Her drawings became less focused on propulsion systems and more on the world around her. Sketches of the river, of birds, and of trees. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch, Emily asked, "Why do people call me a genius, Daddy?" Elon felt his heart ache at the simplicity of her question. He had been dreading this moment, knowing it would come. How could he explain it to her? How could he make her understand that her intelligence, her gift, was something rare and beautiful, but also something that had burdened her? He looked at her, his gaze soft and compassionate. "You are a genius, sweetheart. But that doesn't mean you have to be everything everyone else expects you to be. You don't have to live up to anyone's idea of who you are. You're you, and that's all that matters." Emily was silent for a long moment, her small fingers tracing patterns on the wooden armrest of her chair. Then, finally, she looked up at him with wide eyes. "But if I'm a genius, then what does that mean for me? Will I have to fix everything in the world? Will I have to save everyone?" Elon swallowed hard. He wanted to protect her from the weight of that question, but there was no way to shield her from it forever. Not when she was this aware of her own potential. Not when the world had already begun to look at her as the answer to humanity's greatest challenges. "You don't have to save anyone, Emily," Elon said, his voice filled with conviction. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. What you do with your gift is up to you. You can use it to help people, yes, but you can also choose to use it for yourself, for your own happiness. That's the most important thing. You're not here to fix everything. You're here to live your life, to find joy, and to explore the world in your own way." Emily smiled faintly, her eyes glistening with understanding. She didn't say anything, but the weight that had been on her seemed to lift, if only a little. Back at SpaceX, things were progressing without the young prodigy's direct involvement. The team had made substantial advancements in refining the propulsion system thanks to the work Emily had already done. But something had changed in Elon. The work didn't feel as important as it had before. He found himself thinking more about Emily, about her happiness, her well-being, than about the next big breakthrough. The phone rang late one night, interrupting his thoughts as he sat at his desk. It was Tom, the senior engineer. "Elon, we need to talk," Tom said, his voice strained. "We've got a problem." "What is it?" Elon asked, sitting up straight. "We're getting pressure from investors," Tom continued. "They want results. They're asking when Emily's going to return to the project. They want her back now. There's too much money riding on this." Elon closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the world press against him. He had known this was coming. The investors were impatient, hungry for the next big thing. But for the first time, he didn't feel the urgency to jump back into the race. "I'll be there tomorrow," he said quietly, his mind made up. He hung up the phone and stood from his desk, staring out the window at the distant lights of the SpaceX campus. The world was waiting for Emily's next step, but he wasn't sure if he was ready to bring her back into that chaos. He walked over to the small photograph on his desk, the one of him, Maria, and Emily, laughing on a day just before all of this started. It was a moment of peace, of simplicity. He wanted to protect that. He wanted Emily to have the choice to decide her own future without being swept away by the storm. As he looked at the photo, he knew one thing for sure. The journey ahead would require sacrifices. But the question was, who and what would he sacrifice to ensure Emily's happiness? The days that followed Elon's decision to keep Emily secluded were filled with a strange sense of peace, mixed with a growing tension that hung in the air. He was more present at the cabin than he'd been in months. His days spent hiking through the forests with Emily, teaching her how to fish in the river, and letting the weight of the world slip away, if only for a little while. Maria, too, seemed to breathe easier in the solitude, though she couldn't entirely shake her worries. But there was no escaping the reality for long. No matter how much he wanted to keep things simple, the world outside had a way of creeping in, reminding him that the future of space exploration, and everything that came with it, was on the line. The call from NASA. It started with a phone call. NASA had been quiet for a while, but now they were reaching out again, this time with a sense of urgency that Elon couldn't ignore. The call came through the secure line just as Elon was sitting down with Emily on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. The bright colors reflected in the calm water of the river, a sight that had become their daily ritual. Elon Musk, the voice on the other end, was sharp, efficient. "This is Dr. Clara Jennings from NASA. I trust you're well?" Elon's face tightened, the pleasantness of the cabin fading away. "I'm good, Clara. What can I do for you?" "We need to discuss the propulsion system," Dr. Jennings continued. "The data you shared with us is groundbreaking, and we believe it has the potential to change not just space exploration, but energy production as we know it. We've been in talks with several government agencies, including the Department of Defense, and there's a growing consensus that we need to accelerate this development. The potential applications for this technology, both civilian and military, are far-reaching." Elon clenched his fists. He could already sense where this conversation was headed. "I understand the urgency," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "But we need to take a step back. The technology is still in its infancy. We can't rush this." Dr. Jennings didn't miss a beat. "We're not asking you to rush it, Elon. But this is a global race. China, Russia, they're already making strides in similar areas. And if we don't act quickly, we'll lose our edge. The geopolitical implications are too great to ignore. We need Emily back on the project. The data she's already generated is revolutionary. It's imperative that we keep the momentum going." Elon's mind raced. He had known this moment would come, had known that the moment Emily's discovery became public, the pressure to accelerate it would build. But to hear it from NASA's mouth made it all too real. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "We'll be ready to discuss next steps in person when you're back in town," Dr. Jennings said. "We'd like to set up a meeting with our team at the earliest opportunity. We're prepared to allocate the resources needed to make this happen." Elon didn't respond right away. He could hear the tension in the room with Emily, the silence stretching long after Dr. Jennings finished speaking. He closed his eyes, imagining the kind of pressure that would come with throwing Emily back into that world. The world that didn't see her as a child, but as a tool, a resource. "I'll get back to you," Elon said, hanging up the phone. The next day, as the sun climbed higher in the sky, the peaceful isolation of the cabin began to feel increasingly fragile. The phone rang again. This time, it was Tom, the senior engineer at SpaceX. "Elon," Tom said, his voice low, "the investors are calling. They want to know when Emily's coming back. We're seeing a slowdown in progress without her direct involvement. There's a lot of money tied up in this, and they're starting to ask questions. If we don't deliver soon, there are going to be some major repercussions. They're talking about pulling funding if we don't deliver on the next phase." Elon leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. The stakes were higher than they had ever been. The investors weren't interested in Emily's well-being. They weren't concerned with her childhood or the toll the project had taken on her. They wanted results. They wanted what they had been promised. "I understand," Elon replied, his voice tight. "We're moving forward. I'll be back in the office soon. Let them know we're handling it." He hung up the phone, his mind swirling. The pressure from NASA and the investors was growing by the minute, and he knew he couldn't ignore it forever. The world was demanding more, and time was running out. Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed, Elon sat across from Maria at the kitchen table. The weight of the day's decisions hung in the air like smoke. Maria had always been his sounding board, the one person who could see things from his perspective without the cloud of ambition or business interests. "Elon," Maria said quietly, breaking the silence, "I can see what you're thinking. The pressure from NASA, from the investors, it's all building. But you know what that means, right? It means we're about to take Emily back into that world. The same world that nearly broke her before." Elon exhaled sharply, rubbing his face. "I know. I can feel it, Maria. I want to protect her, but I don't know if I can hold it off forever. If we don't move quickly, someone else will. Someone who doesn't care about her, about what she's been through." Maria leaned forward, her eyes filled with concern. "I get it. I do. But she's still a child. She needs time. She needs to be able to choose what she wants, not have it chosen for her by the media, by investors, or by anyone else. If we let her go back into that world too soon, it could break her. For good." Elon stared at her for a long moment, the weight of her words sinking in. He had always believed in pushing the boundaries of what was possible. But this was different. This was his daughter. And her future, her happiness, was more important than any technological breakthrough. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Maria reached out, placing a hand on his. "You'll figure it out. But you need to remember that we don't just have to fight for SpaceX or the future of humanity. We have to fight for her childhood, for her peace. She's been through so much already." Elon closed his eyes, the realization hitting him full force. He had been so focused on the bigger picture, so obsessed with the potential of Emily's discovery, that he had lost sight of what mattered most. He didn't know if it was possible to have both, the future of space exploration and Emily's well-being, but he had to try. That night, as the stars began to fill the sky, Elon made the hardest decision of his life. He picked up his phone and dialed Dr. Clara Jennings at NASA. "I've thought it over," Elon said, his voice steady but with an edge of finality. "We're not going to rush this. Emily will return to the project when she's ready. I'm not going to force her into something she's not prepared for. If you want to move forward with this technology, you'll have to do it without her for now. I need more time to ensure she's in the right state of mind. You can continue your research, but she needs a break from all of it." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Dr. Jennings spoke, her voice measured. "I understand, Elon, but I hope you understand the stakes. The world is waiting." Elon closed his eyes, feeling the gravity of her words. "I understand. But Emily's future is more important than anyone's idea of what the world needs." He hung up the phone, the decision made. The days that followed were quieter. Elon and Maria kept Emily secluded in the cabin, allowing her to enjoy the freedom of childhood again. No expectations, no deadlines, just time to rediscover the joy in the simple things. Elon wasn't sure how long they could keep up this lifestyle, but for now, he was content with the peace they had found. He had made a choice. It wasn't an easy one, and it would come with consequences, but it was the right one. As he sat beside Emily one evening, watching her play by the river, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. He didn't know what the future would hold for SpaceX, or for the propulsion system, or for humanity's exploration of the stars. But for now, Emily was safe, and that was enough. Weeks passed, but the pressure didn't let up. Elon had hoped that the quiet retreat would allow Emily the space she needed to recover and regain some semblance of normality, but the world had its own timeline, and it wasn't concerned with the healing of a child. Elon couldn't escape the growing demands. Every time he thought he had a moment to breathe, another phone call came, another email, another investor demanding results. The implications of his decision to shield Emily were becoming painfully clear. Progress on the propulsion system had stalled, and the investors were beginning to show their discontent. At the same time, SpaceX was struggling to maintain momentum. The research and development teams had been working tirelessly, but without Emily's unparalleled insights, they were pushing at the limits of what they could achieve without her. Elon had made the call to stand by his daughter, but now the questions from his team were becoming harder to avoid. "Do you think we can hold off much longer?" Maria asked one night, her voice tinged with concern. "The teams are starting to get restless. And the investors, they're circling like sharks." Elon sat at the kitchen table, staring at the flickering light of a candle. Emily was upstairs, asleep, and for a moment, he let himself feel the weight of everything pressing down on him. "We're walking a tightrope," Elon admitted. "If I push too hard, Emily might snap. If I cave in, the team will lose faith in me. If we don't get results soon, they'll pull the funding. And I don't even know what will happen then. What if all of this was for nothing?" Maria sighed softly, leaning back in her chair. "I wish there were an easy answer. But we can't keep living in a bubble, Elon. The world is waiting for you, waiting for us to deliver. We promised them the future." Elon nodded slowly, his thoughts dark. The propulsion system was his passion. SpaceX was his life. But now that he had seen Emily through a different lens, now that he had felt the joy of watching her rediscover the world, of seeing her be just a child again, he wasn't sure if the future was worth the price they were paying. The breakthrough, or rather, the moment that felt like a breakthrough, came when Elon received a letter from an unexpected source. It wasn't from NASA or the investors, but from Emily herself. She had been quiet for days, still drawing and scribbling away in her sketchbooks, but it wasn't until one afternoon that Elon noticed something different. Emily had set her drawings aside and started writing, her small handwriting filling page after page. It was a letter, a long, beautiful, heartfelt letter addressed to him. He sat in the living room, reading her words slowly, almost as if he were afraid to miss something. "Dear Daddy, I've been thinking a lot lately, about space and rockets and all the things I've done. I know you want me to help, and I really, really do want to. I think it's fun to solve problems and make new things. But sometimes, I feel like I'm not just solving problems. I feel like I'm trying to fix the whole world. And that's a lot for me to carry. You always tell me that it's okay to be scared, but I don't know how to feel anymore. Sometimes, I don't want to think about rockets or propulsion. Sometimes, I just want to be a kid. I want to climb trees and play with my friends and draw pictures of animals. I love you, Daddy, but I don't want to be a genius forever. I don't want the whole world to look at me like I have to solve everything. I just want to be me. Love, Emily." Elon sat in stunned silence, the weight of her words hitting him harder than any investor's demand ever could. He read the letter again, slowly, this time letting the full meaning sink in. Emily wasn't asking for permission to stop. She wasn't demanding a break. She was simply telling him that she wanted to live her life. She wanted to be free of the expectations that had already been placed on her. For the first time since all of this began, Elon realized that Emily wasn't just a prodigy. She was his daughter. And that meant she had the right to choose who she wanted to be. The next morning, Elon arranged for a meeting with Maria and a few trusted members of the team. They all sat down in the small dining room, and as soon as the door shut behind him, Elon felt the heaviness of the conversation ahead. "Look, I've been thinking," Elon started, his voice resolute, "and I've made a decision. Emily needs space. She needs to live her life outside of this. Outside of everything. I've been pushing this too hard." Maria exchanged a glance with one of the engineers. "What do you mean, Elon? We can't stop now. We've made too much progress. If we don't keep moving forward—" "I'm not talking about stopping the project," Elon interrupted. "I'm talking about Emily. She's not a machine. She's not some asset. She's a child. And it's time we all stop treating her like a piece of technology. She has to be allowed to grow on her own terms." The room fell silent. No one spoke for a long while. The reality of what Elon was proposing was too big for them to digest at once. "We'll continue the work, but Emily won't be the one driving it. She'll be here with us when she wants to be. She'll work on things that inspire her, not things that weigh her down. I won't let the world turn her into something she's not. I won't let us do that." Maria looked at him, her eyes filled with both pride and fear. "Are you sure? There's a lot riding on this, Elon. Not just for SpaceX, but for humanity. We have the chance to change everything." "I know," Elon said quietly. "But at the end of the day, What's the point of changing the world if you lose the people you love in the process? The decision wasn't easy, but Elon knew in his heart it was the right one. Over the following weeks, the tone at SpaceX shifted. They continued working on the propulsion system, but the urgency had lessened. The media, though still hungry for progress, was no longer hounding them with the same ferocity. As for Emily, she found herself rediscovering the world she had once been robbed of. She spent hours drawing, not propulsion systems, but animals and nature scenes, things she had once adored before the chaos had consumed her. She spent her days exploring the outdoors, reading books about the stars, this time, without the pressure to solve the mysteries of the universe. And for the first time in a long while, Elon watched his daughter laugh freely, unburdened by the expectations of a world that had always tried to define her. One evening, after a long day of drawing and exploring, Emily came to sit beside him on the porch. The sun was setting again, painting the sky with colors he could never quite replicate. She looked up at him, her small face filled with something resembling peace. "Daddy," she said softly, "I think I'm ready to do something special again. But this time, I want to choose what it is." Elon smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "Whatever you choose, Emily. It's your world. We're just here to help you build it." Emily grinned and hugged him tightly. It was a moment of clarity, a moment that felt like a new beginning. For the first time, Elon felt like he was truly living in the present. Not for the future, not for the press, not for the investors, but for the people he loved. And that was enough. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The weeks following Elon's decision were filled with unexpected tranquility. The weight of the world, of deadlines, expectations, and the constant pressure from SpaceX's investors, felt lighter. The cabin, once a sanctuary from the chaos, was now a true home again. Elon and Maria had found a new rhythm, one that was more focused on Emily's well-being than on the future of propulsion systems or SpaceX's financial forecast. And yet, despite the sense of peace that pervaded their daily lives, Elon couldn't escape the undercurrent of unease that tugged at him. SpaceX was still working on the propulsion system, but the truth was, they were struggling without Emily's guidance. He couldn't help but feel torn. He had chosen his daughter's happiness over the needs of the company, and while that decision felt right on some level, there were days when the sheer weight of what he was sacrificing hung heavily on his shoulders. It was late afternoon when the phone call came. Elon had just finished an outdoor session with Emily, teaching her how to fly a drone, something she had been fascinated by since she was old enough to understand the mechanics of flight. The sky had been painted in shades of purple and orange, the sun slowly dipping below the horizon. Emily's laughter echoed across the open field, and for the first time in a long while, Elon allowed himself to fully embrace the moment. But his peace was interrupted by a ringing phone. "Elon," the voice on the other end was familiar, but the tone was different, urgent, almost desperate. It was Tom, SpaceX's lead engineer. "We have a problem." Elon's stomach sank. "What kind of problem?" "We're at a standstill. We've pushed the propulsion system as far as we can without Emily's input. The simulations are failing, and the data is inconsistent. We've gone through every possible angle. There's just no way forward without her insights." Elon's mind raced. "I thought we agreed Emily needs time." "We understand that, but," Tom's voice trailed off, a deep breath on the other end. "The thing is, the stakes have changed. The investors have made it clear. They won't wait much longer. They've given us a deadline. If we don't make progress soon, they'll pull the funding and the entire project will be scrapped. We're on the verge of losing everything, Elon." The words hit Elon like a punch to the gut. Everything. He had built SpaceX into a company that could change the course of humanity's future. And now, it was all at risk. "Elon, we need Emily's genius, now more than ever," Tom continued. "I know this isn't easy, but we don't have much time. You've built something extraordinary, but it's falling apart without her. Please, just let us know when she's ready to come back." The line went silent for a moment, and Elon could feel the weight of Tom's plea. It wasn't just business, it was survival. "I'll think about it," Elon finally said, his voice heavy. He hung up, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. That night, after Emily had gone to bed, Elon sat alone in the living room, his thoughts a whirlwind. Maria joined him shortly after, her expression concerned as she placed a cup of tea in front of him. "You've been quiet tonight," she said gently. "What's going on?" Elon rubbed his temples, trying to put his thoughts into words. "Tom called. The propulsion system. It's failing without Emily. The investors are threatening to pull funding if we don't make significant progress. And we're running out of time. They want results, Maria. They need her." Maria sat down beside him, her voice quiet but firm. "You know that's not the answer, right?" Elon stared into his cup, feeling the heat of the tea but unable to feel any warmth. "I thought I was doing the right thing by keeping her away from all of this. But now I don't know. The world is waiting, Maria. And the world doesn't care about what we want. It cares about results. It's bigger than us." Maria took a deep breath. "Elon, we knew this wouldn't be easy. But you've always said that nothing worth doing comes without sacrifice. Emily has already sacrificed so much of her childhood. I'm not asking you to ignore SpaceX, but you can't just send her back into that pressure cooker." "I didn't want to," Elon muttered. "But every day that passes, I feel like I'm losing control. I promised the world I would change it, and now I'm failing." Maria reached out, placing a hand on his. "No, you're not failing. But you can't force her into something that isn't her choice. If we make this decision for her, we're robbing her of the future you've been fighting for. The real future. The one where she gets to decide what she wants to do with her life." Elon's eyes met hers, the weight of her words sinking in. He knew she was right. The next morning, as the sun rose over the mountains, Elon took Emily for a walk. The cool morning air filled their lungs, and the quiet of the wilderness wrapped around them like a protective blanket. As they walked along the path by the river, Emily stopped suddenly, turning to him with a curious expression. "Daddy, are you okay?" she asked, her eyes wide with concern. Elon crouched down to her level, his heart aching at the innocence in her voice. "I've been thinking a lot, Emily. About everything. About SpaceX and the propulsion system and the promises I've made to the world." She tilted her head, her brow furrowing slightly. "What promises, Daddy?" Elon exhaled slowly. "I promised the world that we could change everything, that we could make space travel easier and safer. But I didn't think about what that meant for you, for your happiness. And now, I'm not sure what to do." Emily looked at him, her small fingers brushing against the leaves of a nearby tree. Then, in a voice that sounded far older than her 4 years, she said, "I think it's okay if we wait, Daddy. You taught me that good things take time, and sometimes we just need to breathe." Elon stood up slowly, feeling the gravity of her words. She was right. Emily was more mature than any adult he had ever known, but she was still a child. She needed time. She needed space to just be herself, to let her childhood unfold without the weight of the world on her shoulders. And maybe, just maybe, he needed that too. Later that day, Elon made the call. He contacted Tom, telling him that the propulsion system project would move forward, but that it would proceed at a slower, more measured pace. He told him that they would find new ways to innovate, without rushing Emily back into the fold. SpaceX would continue to push the boundaries of what was possible, but not at the cost of Emily's well-being. "I've made my decision," Elon told Tom. "We'll make this work, but I'm not pushing Emily back into this world until she's ready. If we lose the funding, we lose it. But I can't put her through that again." Tom was quiet for a long moment. "Understood. I'll relay the message to the investors." Elon hung up the phone, his chest heavy but his mind clear. For the first time in weeks, he felt at peace. As the days passed, the pressure from SpaceX and the investors remained, but Elon no longer let it define his choices. He focused on Emily's well-being, ensuring she had the space to explore her interests without the shadow of the world's expectations. Together, they spent their days hiking, drawing, and learning about the stars without the urgency of deadlines. And in those moments, Elon began to realize something profound. The world didn't need to be saved by a single genius. It needed to be changed by people who had the courage to live authentically, who made choices based on what truly mattered. The future of space exploration wasn't about rushing to the next breakthrough. It was about ensuring that the future we built was one worth living. Elon smiled, watching Emily chase butterflies across the meadow, her laughter carrying through the air like music. She wasn't just a genius. She was a child, a beautiful, free soul who would shape the future in her own time, on her own terms. And that was enough for now. The days following Elon's decision to slow down were filled with unexpected stillness. Emily had flourished in the time away from the relentless pressure, her drawings becoming more intricate and her stories more imaginative. She no longer spoke of rockets or propulsion systems. Instead, she would tell tales of distant planets with creatures that defied every law of physics. Elon found himself laughing at the absurdity of it all, marveling at her ability to create whole worlds from mere fantasy. However, the peace was not to last long. The ripple effects of the decision to halt the propulsion system research reached beyond SpaceX's walls. Investors, while quiet for the moment, were not blind to what was happening. And the world, always watching, was ready to pounce. A week after Elon had made the call to slow things down, he received an unexpected email. It wasn't from one of the usual partners or SpaceX affiliates, but from a competitor, a name that had only recently begun to make waves in the space community, Nova Aerospace. Elon's eyes narrowed as he read the subject line, Nova Aerospace announces breakthrough in next-gen propulsion technology. He clicked open the email, and the first few lines were enough to send a chill down his spine. Dear Mr. Musk, it has come to our attention that SpaceX's propulsion research has faced unexpected delays. At Nova Aerospace, we are proud to announce that we have achieved a significant breakthrough in propulsion technology, one that promises to make Mars travel a reality within the next decade. Our technology has been independently verified and is now entering Phase 3 of development. We look forward to the opportunity to discuss potential collaborations, but we also understand if you'd prefer to remain focused on your own efforts. Best regards, Dr. Emily Saito. The name sent a shock through Elon's system. Emily Saito. He had heard whispers of her in the media, a brilliant physicist with a background in advanced aerospace engineering. But to have a company as powerful as Nova Aerospace pushing forward with a propulsion system that rivaled SpaceX's was a new level of competition. Elon leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen, his mind racing. He had heard the rumors, but this was real. Nova had not only cracked the code, they were already moving forward. Their Phase 3 meant they were on the verge of practical implementation. If SpaceX couldn't answer, everything he had worked for could be eclipsed in a matter of years. The next morning, the storm hit. SpaceX's senior leadership team gathered in the boardroom, the tension thick in the air as Elon walked in. Maria, as always, sat beside him, her expression calm, but the worry in her eyes was unmistakable. Okay, Elon, we need to talk, Tom began, his voice tight. Nova's announcement, it changes everything. If they're as far along as they claim, we could be years behind them. Our investors are already asking questions. Elon ran a hand through his hair. I've already made the call, Tom. I won't rush Emily back into this. We understand that, Tom replied, but we also understand the stakes. We're not just competing for technology. We're competing for the future of humanity. We're competing for the one thing that will keep SpaceX relevant. Mars. If Nova is ahead, we lose that edge. And right now, without Emily, we don't have a path forward. Elon could feel the pressure mounting, the very same pressure that had driven him to launch SpaceX all those years ago. But now, the stakes had changed. It wasn't just the company's future at risk, it was the future of exploration itself. We don't even know if their claims are true, Elon said, trying to hold on to some semblance of control. It's possible they're exaggerating. It's possible they're bluffing. But we can't know unless we see their work for ourselves. We need a plan, Elon, Maria said, her voice soft but firm. The investors want action, and they'll only wait so long. If we don't have something to show by the end of the quarter, it's over. Elon stood up, pacing the room. He had to make a decision. His mind kept returning to the same question. Was it worth it? Was it worth pulling Emily back into this when she had finally begun to heal? The world was pushing him into a corner, and the only way out might be to cross a line he had sworn never to cross. That night, after everyone had left the boardroom, Elon sat alone, staring at the darkened skyline outside the window. The only sound was the steady hum of the air conditioning. His phone buzzed, an unexpected message from Maria. "We need to talk. Call me." Elon stood up and dialed her number, his thoughts racing. "Maria," he said as soon as she picked up. "What is it?" "I've been thinking," Maria replied. "What if there's a way to bring Emily back, but in a way that feels right for her? I know how much you want to protect her from this world, but if we don't act soon, everything could slip away. The investors, the future, all of it." Elon rubbed his forehead, exhaling. But pushing her back into this, pushing her to be what the world expects her to be, could break her. "I promised her we'd slow down." "I understand," Maria said softly, "but Emily's not a child forever. You said it yourself. She's capable of making decisions, of understanding the stakes. Maybe it's time we let her in on what's happening. Let her decide for herself if she wants to help or if she needs more time. But we can't keep her in the dark. Not anymore." Elon sat in silence for a moment, absorbing her words. He knew she was right. Emily wasn't a normal child. She had a maturity beyond her years, a comprehension of the world that many adults would never have. If anyone could help them navigate this crisis, it was her. But the question was, would she want to? The next day, Elon took Emily to the quiet space by the river that had become their haven. It was their place, untouched by the weight of the world. They sat on the grassy bank, the sound of the flowing water calming their nerves. "Elon," Emily said after a while, her voice serious for someone so young, "what's happening? You've been really sad lately, and you don't talk to me as much." Elon's heart clenched. How could he explain all of this to her? The pressure, the competition, the demands? She was only 4. Yet, there was no denying the depth in her eyes, the wisdom that defied her age. "Things are changing, Emily," Elon said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "There's a company, Nova Aerospace. They've made some breakthroughs. Big ones. Ones that could change everything for us. We've been working for years to make Mars a reality, but now, we're at a crossroads." Emily tilted her head, her curiosity piqued. "What does that mean for us?" "It means," Elon began, pausing as if weighing the impact of his words, "that we might not get there first, and we might lose everything if we don't catch up." Emily didn't flinch. Instead, she looked at him with a small, knowing smile. "You're scared, aren't you, Daddy?" Elon blinked, taken aback by her insight. "I guess I am." "You don't need to be scared," she said matter-of-factly. "You just need to try your best. And if we don't get there first, then we'll just have to try harder. But maybe you can help them. If they need it." Elon's eyes widened. She understands. She wasn't just a child who needed protection. She was a force, an agent of change, just like him. "You would help, Emily?" he asked, his voice soft, almost afraid to hope. Emily nodded, her little hands clasped together in her lap. "I think I can, but only if we do it together." For the first time in months, Elon felt a weight lift from his chest. Emily wasn't asking him to choose between her and SpaceX. She wasn't demanding he give up on his dreams. Instead, she was offering him a partnership. She was offering him the future, their future. "We'll do it together, Emily," Elon whispered, his heart swelling with pride. "We'll do it on your terms." The next few weeks were filled with a renewed sense of purpose. Elon brought Emily into the fold, not as a prodigy, but as a collaborator. He explained everything to her, the challenges SpaceX was facing, the pressure from Nova Aerospace, and the gravity of the situation. And for the first time, Emily took on the role of mentor instead of student, helping Elon make decisions that were both calculated and compassionate. Together, they forged a new path forward. They would take their time, they would explore, and they would innovate, but they would do so in a way that kept Emily's childhood intact. And as they watched the stars from their cabin on those quiet nights, Elon realized that the future wasn't just about the race to Mars. It was about building a world where their choices were driven by love, by understanding, and by the promise that no matter what happened, they would always be in it together. The days after Elon's decision to move forward with Emily's help felt like the calm before a storm. The air in the cabin was always filled with a low hum of creativity. Emily, far more perceptive than her 4 years suggested, had been an invaluable asset in their work. She wasn't just absorbing the challenges, she was actively offering solutions. Each day, she drew new designs, made sense of data, and came up with ideas that were both imaginative and brilliant. Ideas that could change everything. But the rest of the world wasn't standing still. Nova Aerospace, led by Dr. Emily Saito, was progressing at an alarming pace. The media was eating up the stories of their breakthroughs, and the company was making huge strides in propulsion technology. Every day, their updates made the competition feel more and more insurmountable. Elon couldn't deny that the pressure was on. He had made a decision to let Emily take the lead, but with the clock ticking and the stakes rising, the world was demanding results, fast. It was a rainy Thursday when the first test was scheduled. SpaceX had made slow, but steady progress with the propulsion system, using the preliminary ideas that Elon and Emily had discussed together. They were now at a stage where they needed to run a series of simulations to check the system's viability. Elon sat in front of the screen in the operations room, his eyes fixed on the real-time data as it streamed in. Emily was beside him, her little fingers resting lightly on the table, her focus unwavering. "Are you ready?" Elon asked her, a hint of nervousness creeping into his voice. Emily nodded, her face serious but determined. "Let's see what happens." Tom stood behind them, observing the test results. The tension in the room was palpable as the engineers began the first simulation. The propulsion system roared to life on the screen. The numbers flickered, jumping from one figure to another, too fast for most people to follow, but not for Emily. She squinted at the data and pointed to one of the graphs. "That's off. The energy is spiking too fast." Elon leaned forward. "Can you adjust it?" Emily nodded. Her small hands hovered over the touchscreen, adjusting the parameters with the precision of a seasoned engineer. The room held its breath as the numbers began to stabilize. Within moments, the simulation smoothed out, the energy fluctuations were reduced, and the system was performing at a level that no one had expected. "We have a breakthrough," Elon murmured, a slow smile spreading across his face. The team erupted in applause, but Emily simply smiled back at him, as if this were just another day. For her, it was just the beginning. For Elon, it was the spark of hope he had been waiting for. However, despite this success, Elon knew that they were still only at the beginning. Nova Aerospace had made its own progress, and as the weeks passed, it became clear that their technology was far more advanced than SpaceX's current propulsion system. Even with Emily's brilliance, they were trailing behind. One evening, as Elon sat in his office looking at the progress reports, his phone buzzed again. It was a message from an old acquaintance, someone who had been with SpaceX from the very beginning, now working at a competitor. "Elon, I don't know how to tell you this, but Nova's already begun building prototypes. They've got a working system. They're testing it on a scale that is unheard of. If you don't move fast, they're going to beat you to Mars, and they might even outpace you in the private space race altogether. You need to act now." Elon stared at the message for a long time, his mind racing. The message was clear. They couldn't afford to wait. But at the same time, he wasn't willing to compromise the integrity of what he and Emily were building. The line between genius and madness had always been thin, but now it felt razor-sharp. The next day, Elon met with his team in the conference room to discuss the next steps. Tom, his chief engineer, spoke first. "Elon, we need to speed up our efforts. We've made good progress, but Nova is ahead. They've already built and tested their prototype. If we can't match them, we risk losing everything." Elon looked around the room, seeing the concern in every face. He understood the urgency. They were all playing catch-up, and the pressure was only increasing. Maria sat beside him, her expression neutral, but her eyes betraying the worry she felt. "Elon, are we sure about this? Pushing too fast now could break what we've built with Emily. She's come so far, and we're on the verge of something incredible. But if we rush, we might lose what makes this whole endeavor worth it." Elon stared out the window, his mind torn. Emily had become the heart of their innovation, but at the same time, he knew that the world wasn't going to wait for them to get it right. If SpaceX didn't respond soon, they could lose their edge. Tom interjected, his voice firm. We don't have the luxury of waiting. We need to make a decision now. Elon's gaze flicked to Emily, who was sitting in the corner, silently observing the conversation. Her presence felt like a reminder that the decision he made now would affect not only the future of SpaceX but her future as well. Finally, Elon spoke, his voice resolute but heavy with the weight of his decision. We'll push forward, but we do it on our terms. We'll speed things up, but we don't sacrifice our integrity. No shortcuts. Tom nodded, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Understood. But we're going to need to pull out all the stops. Later that afternoon, as Emily worked on a new design, Elon received another unexpected call, this time from Dr. Emily Saito herself, the CEO of Nova Aerospace. Elon, I wanted to personally reach out, she said, her voice warm but businesslike. We've been watching your progress at SpaceX, and I have to say, I'm impressed. But I think we both know that the race to Mars is far more complex than anyone anticipated. I wanted to invite you for a discussion, perhaps even a collaboration. We have mutual goals. Together, we could change the world. Elon was taken aback. The audacity of it. A collaboration? Nova Aerospace had spent years positioning itself as the rival to SpaceX, and now they were offering a partnership. Why this sudden change of heart, Dr. Saito? Elon asked, skepticism lacing his tone. I believe we're at a point where the race to space is bigger than individual companies. We could do so much more if we work together. Think of the possibilities, Elon. Imagine what we could achieve with our propulsion systems combined. The future of humanity is waiting, and it's waiting for us to get it right. Elon thought for a moment, his mind swirling with possibilities. A partnership? The idea of working with Nova, of combining the cutting-edge technology from both companies, was intriguing. But he knew that Nova had no intention of playing second fiddle to SpaceX. They were playing a different game, one that he wasn't sure he was ready to join. I'll think about it, Elon said, his voice measured. But understand this, Dr. Saito. SpaceX's mission isn't just about rockets. It's about changing the world in a way that benefits everyone. If we collaborate, it has to be on our terms, not yours. There was a moment of silence on the other end before she spoke again, a hint of amusement in her voice. Of course, Elon, but I think you'll find that we both have the same end goal in mind. Let's talk soon. The line went silent, and Elon stared at the phone in his hand, conflicted. This could change everything, he thought. But at what cost? The next few days were spent weighing the options. SpaceX had made progress, but they were still behind. Nova Aerospace had proven that their propulsion system was operational, and their offer of collaboration was tempting. But the idea of combining forces with a competitor, especially one that had a different vision, felt like a betrayal to everything SpaceX stood for. And yet, there was something in the offer that nagged at him, something that whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was the right time to make a change. Emily had been quiet during the discussions. She watched Elon as he worked late into the night, his mind clearly torn between the two paths. Finally, she climbed into his lap one evening and asked, Daddy, are we still going to the stars? Elon looked down at her, his heart aching. He had promised her the stars. He had promised that they would get there together. Yes, he said softly, his voice filled with resolve. We're going to the stars, but we're going to take our time. We're going to do it our way. Emily smiled, her trust in him unwavering. She didn't need the fastest solution. She just needed him. And together, they would get there, no matter how long it took. The decision was made. Elon Musk had decided to press forward with SpaceX's innovation at his own pace. But the offer from Dr. Emily Saito weighed heavily on his mind. It had been days since their conversation, and while he had tried to focus on his own work with Emily, a voice kept echoing in his thoughts. What if this is the best way forward? Emily was still in the loop, contributing ideas that no one, especially no adult, could have dreamed up. Her latest project was a new form of quantum propulsion, which, if feasible, could leapfrog over the limitations of conventional methods. But with Nova Aerospace continuing to soar in their own achievements, the pressure to innovate faster was mounting and fast. Tom, Maria, and the rest of the team were all pushing for one thing: speed. But how much was too much? How far could they stretch without breaking the delicate balance they had established? The question of whether they could continue to operate on their own, or if a partnership with Nova Aerospace was necessary, lingered at the back of Elon's mind. It was a crisp autumn morning when the turning point came. Elon had just wrapped up another late-night brainstorming session when he was summoned to the conference room. His mind was fogged, and the absence of Emily, who had retreated to her studio to continue her work, made him feel more isolated than ever. As he walked into the room, he was met by a group of his closest engineers, all of them looking at him with varying degrees of concern. Maria stood at the head of the table, her face grim. "Everything all right, Maria?" Elon asked, taking a seat. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "We've run the simulations again, and we're falling behind. Nova Aerospace's propulsion system is not just in testing anymore, it's operational. Their first prototype is scheduled to fly in the next 2 months. Meanwhile, we're still in the refinement stage. We have to move faster, or we risk losing our place in the race altogether." Elon absorbed the news in silence, the weight of it settling in. He had known the situation was dire, but hearing it in such stark terms made the challenge even more real. Tom, sitting across from him, added, "The investors are beginning to ask the tough questions. Our stock's already dropped a few points, and the media is starting to dig into our progress. They're losing faith. We can't afford to wait much longer." Maria cut in. "You've been quiet lately, Elon. What are you thinking?" He looked around the room at the faces he had come to trust over the years. His team, his family, and yet he felt the walls closing in. SpaceX had always been his dream, his vision. He had never been one to compromise. But now? "I don't want to rush Emily," he said slowly, "but we can't ignore the situation either. We can't stay in this holding pattern forever." There was a beat of silence, as if they were all waiting for him to make the next move. Finally, Maria spoke up. "We all know the potential Emily has. She could change everything. But if we don't have the resources to scale her ideas fast enough, we'll be overtaken. That's a reality we have to face." The truth of her words hit harder than anything else. He had spent so much time focusing on the impact Emily's genius had on the world that he hadn't fully internalized just how fast the world was moving. The world wasn't waiting for SpaceX to catch up. It wasn't waiting for Emily to finish her designs. The world was already moving forward with Nova. Later that evening, the phone rang. It was Dr. Saito again. "Hello, Elon," she said, her voice as smooth and confident as ever. "I've been thinking a lot about our previous conversation. We both know that the stakes are high. The race to Mars isn't just about getting there first. It's about who will lead the future of humanity in space." Elon's heart pounded. He knew where this was going. "We both want the same thing, Elon. We want to change the world, make life multiplanetary, and build the future. What if we did it together?" SpaceX and Nova Aerospace, two of the brightest minds in the industry, working side by side to achieve something greater than what either of us could do alone. He stared out at the night sky through his office window, the stars sparkling above. Was this the moment to make the ultimate sacrifice, his dream of an independent SpaceX, for the greater good? The future is always uncertain, Elon. But with Nova's technology and SpaceX's reach, we could be on the surface of Mars within the decade. We could lead humanity into the stars. Together. The invitation hung in the air, tempting yet terrifying. It was an offer that could not be ignored, but also one that could fundamentally alter everything Elon had worked for, everything Emily had worked for. He spoke slowly, carefully choosing his words. "I'll need to discuss this with my team." "Of course," Dr. Saito replied, her voice tinged with something almost like sympathy. "But I think we both know this is the right choice. When you're ready to make the call, we'll be here." The next day, after another round of simulations, Elon found Emily sitting alone in her studio, her legs crossed and a sketchpad in front of her. She was so focused on her drawings that she didn't notice him enter the room. "Elon?" she asked without looking up. He walked in and sat beside her, his mind still wrestling with the decision he had to make. "What are you working on?" he asked, trying to push his own thoughts aside. She flipped the page. "I'm redesigning the way the propulsion system works, something more efficient, something faster." Elon couldn't help but smile. "You're always thinking ahead." Emily looked up at him, her large, curious eyes locking with his. Are we still going to Mars, Daddy? Her question struck him with a force he hadn't expected. The simple innocence in her voice, the trust she had in him. And yet, she knew, deep down, that the path to Mars wasn't simple. It never had been. We're still going, Emily. But the road is changing. The world is moving faster than we expected. Emily cocked her head, a small frown forming on her face. Why don't we just help each other? If we join with Nova, we could get there faster, right? Elon blinked, taken aback. She had cut straight to the heart of the matter. He had been avoiding this exact question for days. But here it was, coming from the very person whose future was at the center of it all. What do you mean? He asked softly. Emily shrugged, her tiny hands picking at the corner of her sketchpad. If we work with them, we could still go to Mars. We could do it together. You always say we need to work together to make things better. Elon's mind was reeling. Emily wasn't just talking about propulsion systems anymore. She was talking about something bigger, something far more complex. She looked up at him again, her face earnest. Why is it bad to work with Nova? If it helps everyone, isn't that good? The next morning, Elon made the call. It was time to meet with Dr. Saito in person. He couldn't afford to stay in the dark any longer. He had to see Nova Aerospace's work firsthand, to understand what they had developed and whether it was truly the key to getting to Mars and beyond. When he arrived at Nova's headquarters, he was greeted with a level of professionalism and innovation that he hadn't expected. The facilities were state-of-the-art, far beyond what he had anticipated. As they walked through the labs, Dr. Saito was eager to show him the propulsion system prototype, which was already showing impressive results in early testing. It's ready, she said confidently. We can deploy this in months. No one else has even come close to what we've achieved. Together, SpaceX and Nova could lead humanity into the future of space exploration. Elon nodded slowly, absorbing the information. He was torn. His mind kept flashing back to Emily's question. Is it bad to work with Nova? But his heart, the one that had always pushed for independence, for doing things the hard way, whispered another question. What if it's time to change the approach? The days following Elon's visit to Nova Aerospace were filled with tension. He couldn't shake the image of the sleek, efficient propulsion system Dr. Saito had shown him. It was everything SpaceX had been striving for but hadn't yet achieved. The system was real, ready for deployment, capable of moving humanity toward Mars at a speed that had once seemed impossible. Yet, there was something inside of him that resisted the idea of partnering with Nova. He knew that this wasn't just about technology. It wasn't even just about getting to Mars. It was about the way he had always approached his companies, on his own terms. SpaceX had always been his dream, his vision, and in many ways, it felt like a reflection of who he was. Independent, rebellious, and driven by a desire to change the world, no matter the odds. And then there was Emily. Elon sat in his office late one night, the glow of his computer screen casting long shadows across the room. His fingers hovered above the keyboard, but he couldn't bring himself to type. His thoughts were still clouded, weighed down by the gravity of the decision ahead. Emily had come to him the night before, her innocent question still echoing in his mind. Why is it bad to work with Nova? It was a question that had forced him to reconsider everything he believed about the journey they were on. He had always been so adamant about going it alone, about SpaceX being the lone wolf in a race to space. But Emily had seen something in him that he hadn't seen in himself. She wasn't bound by the same constraints, the same need for independence. To her, the ultimate goal wasn't about who got there first, but about how to help the most people. And the partnership with Nova could offer that. Elon ran his hand through his hair. He'd promised Emily the stars, but could he deliver them in the way she wanted? Could he risk the future of humanity and his own legacy by rejecting the opportunity to team up with Nova? His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Tom. Elon, we need to make a call soon. Investors are getting restless. Nova is already ahead of us. We can't afford to wait much longer. He stared at the message, feeling the pressure building. Everyone was counting on him to make a decision. The weight of that responsibility pressed on his chest like a vice. That evening, Elon went to Emily's studio, hoping that her presence would bring him some clarity. She was sitting at her drawing table again, surrounded by sheets of paper filled with complex designs, blueprints for a new kind of propulsion system that he could barely comprehend, but somehow knew would change the world. She looked up as he entered, her expression softening when she saw his conflicted face. "What's wrong, Daddy?" she asked, her voice calm and steady despite her youth. Elon sat down beside her, taking a deep breath. "I have a big decision to make, Emily. We've been offered a partnership with Nova Aerospace. They have a propulsion system that could get us to Mars faster than we ever imagined." Emily didn't react immediately, just continuing to draw. Elon watched her, waiting for her response. After a few moments, she finally looked up, meeting his eyes. "Is that what you want?" she asked simply. He was caught off guard by the directness of the question. For a moment, he wasn't sure how to answer. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've always believed that we should do this on our own. Build everything from the ground up, no compromises." Emily tilted her head, her eyes thoughtful. "But if it gets us to Mars faster, wouldn't that be better?" Elon exhaled, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on his chest. She's right, he thought. What's the point of doing it alone if we can achieve our goal faster by working together? "I've spent so long thinking that independence was the only way," he said slowly, "but I'm not sure anymore. If Nova's system works the way they say it will, we could be on Mars in half the time we've planned." Emily's eyes sparkled with excitement, and for a brief moment, Elon saw that same passion in her that had first inspired him to reach for the stars. She wasn't interested in how they got there, just that they did. "I think you're right," she said, smiling up at him. "We could do it together. And we could help more people. Isn't that what matters most?" Her words hit him like a thunderclap. Here she was, this 4-year-old genius unburdened by pride or ego, seeing the bigger picture in ways that he couldn't. She wasn't concerned about who led the charge or who took credit. She just wanted the future to be better. The next morning, Elon arranged a final meeting with Dr. Emily Saito. This time, he was prepared to listen. He knew that the road ahead would not be easy, and there would be sacrifices along the way. But perhaps it was time to embrace the collaboration that could accelerate the mission. He arrived at Nova Aerospace's headquarters once again, this time with a different mindset. Dr. Saito greeted him with the same warmth, but there was an edge to her smile now. She knew this meeting could be a turning point. "I'm glad you're here, Elon," she said as they walked through the sleek, modern halls of Nova Aerospace. "We're ready to take this to the next level. With your expertise in rocketry and our propulsion system, we could achieve what no one else has." Elon nodded, his mind racing. He was no longer simply considering the offer. He was weighing the impact it would have on the future. For all the pride and drive he had to do things on his own, he had to admit that this partnership could be the key to changing everything, faster and more efficiently than he had ever imagined. "I've thought about it," Elon said, pausing in front of the large screen that displayed Nova's latest model. "And I think you're right. We can do this together." Dr. Sato's expression softened, but there was still a sharpness to her eyes. "I'm glad you've come to that conclusion. But remember, this partnership won't be without its challenges. SpaceX has a vision, and so does Nova. There will be compromises along the way." "I understand," Elon replied. "But if the end goal is to make humanity multiplanetary, then I think we can find a way to make it work. I'm not looking for just a partnership. I'm looking for a way to change the world, and this could be the way to do it." Dr. Sato's smile widened. "Exactly. This is the future of space exploration, Elon. We both know it." Back at SpaceX's headquarters, the news of Elon's decision spread quickly. Tom, Maria, and the rest of the team were initially stunned by the announcement, but as the days passed, they began to see the logic behind it. Tom was the first to speak up. "You really think this is the right move?" Elon nodded, his face resolute. "It's not just about getting to Mars anymore. It's about creating a future for all of humanity. This collaboration with Nova isn't the easy way. It's the right way. We have the chance to make a lasting impact, and that's what matters." Maria placed a hand on his shoulder. "If this works, we could change everything. Together." Emily, who had been quietly listening in the corner, spoke up again, her voice as wise as ever for someone so young. "We'll go to the stars, Daddy. We'll do it together." As the partnership between SpaceX and Nova Aerospace was finalized, the world watched in awe. The combination of SpaceX's ingenuity and Nova's advanced propulsion system was a game-changer, and the collaboration promised to catapult humanity into the future. Elon stood beside Dr. Saito at the press conference announcing the merger, his hand resting on Emily's shoulder. She was still the spark of inspiration that had guided him, and now, together, they had all the tools to make the dream of space exploration a reality. "We are on the brink of a new era," Elon said, his voice filled with conviction. "The race to Mars is no longer a dream. It's a mission we'll accomplish together." And with that, the world watched as two visionary companies, SpaceX and Nova Aerospace, joined forces to lead humanity to the stars. The partnership between SpaceX and Nova Aerospace was hailed as a revolutionary moment in the history of space exploration. Headlines across the world buzzed with excitement. Billionaires, scientists, and visionaries like Elon Musk and Dr. Emily Saito were joining forces to push humanity to the stars. For a moment, it seemed as though everything was aligned for success, until the cracks began to show. At first, the merger seemed like a match made in heaven. SpaceX brought its incredible rocketry expertise, while Nova's advanced propulsion systems promised to redefine space travel. The first joint projects were exciting. New designs for spacecraft, reimagining Mars habitats, and designing the fastest and most efficient way to get there. The team was energized by the shared vision of getting humanity to Mars, but as the months passed, something more troubling began to emerge. Elon's role in the new company was clear. He was the face of the mission, the one who could inspire and galvanize. But with Nova's technology at the core of the partnership, Dr. Sato's influence was undeniable. She was a brilliant leader, but her focus on efficiency and streamlined processes clashed with Elon's more chaotic, risk-taking style. It was during the first official meeting of the joint leadership team that the tension first became palpable. Elon had always believed in the power of pushing boundaries, of testing new ideas without being afraid to fail. But Nova's engineering philosophy was rooted in caution. Their methods were more methodical, more controlled. Dr. Saito believed that the path to success was through precision and order, no shortcuts, no risks that could endanger the entire project. The argument started innocently enough. They were discussing the first launch of the newly designed spacecraft, a monumental event that would set the tone for everything to come. Elon was excited about the potential, but Dr. Saito was cautious, pointing out that there were still several untested variables in the propulsion system. The spacecraft could make history, but only if they ensured every component was perfect. Elon, his frustration simmering beneath the surface, responded quickly. "Perfection doesn't exist. We have to push it forward, take risks. Space exploration is about testing the impossible. Otherwise, we'll never get anywhere." Maria, sitting between them, attempted to mediate. "Elon, you know how much is at stake. We can't afford another failure." "I know what's at stake," Elon snapped. "But if we wait for everything to be perfect, we'll never leave Earth." Dr. Sato's voice was steady but firm. "You're right, but I am not going to risk the entire mission on a hunch." Elon leaned forward, the sharp edge of his words cutting through the room. "And I'm not going to sit on my hands while we wait for everything to line up perfectly. We've got a chance to change history here, and we won't get another one. If you want perfect, go build another Mars rover. If you want to change the world, then we take that risk." The room fell silent. It wasn't just a philosophical difference. It was a clash of personalities. SpaceX's daring, sometimes reckless approach against Nova's calculated precision. As the weeks went on, the tension between Elon and Dr. Saito began to seep into the broader team. Engineers who once worked side by side in the SpaceX labs found themselves caught in the middle of a philosophical war. Some admired Dr. Sato's precision, while others were drawn to Elon's vision and willingness to gamble on the future. Tom, who had always been one of Elon's most trusted allies, noticed the shift in the team's dynamic. The SpaceX culture was founded on hustle and moving fast and breaking things, but Nova's culture was all about stability and avoiding mistakes at all costs. "The team's not used to this, Elon," Tom said one afternoon, after another round of tense discussions with Dr. Sato's people. "We're moving in two different directions. We need to find a way to make this work, or it's going to implode." Elon stared out at the SpaceX headquarters, the sun setting on another long day of work. I know, Tom. I'm not sure how to make it work. Every time I try to push forward, I'm met with resistance. I didn't sign up for this. In the midst of all this turmoil, Emily remained a constant source of clarity for Elon. She was, in many ways, the child's voice of reason, the one who could cut through all the complexity of adult egos and endless technicalities. She had been spending more time at SpaceX since the merger, her designs on propulsion systems continuing to evolve and impress everyone around her. But it was during a quiet moment that her simple question made Elon pause. "Daddy," Emily asked one evening, her small hand clutching the edge of his desk as she watched him in silence. "Why are you so mad?" Elon sighed, rubbing his forehead. "It's not that I'm mad, Emily. I'm frustrated. Everyone has different ideas about how we should do this. Sometimes it feels like we're all pulling in different directions." She didn't respond right away, but seemed to consider this. Then, she spoke with the kind of confidence that belied her years. "Maybe you don't need to go in the same direction all the time. Maybe the best way forward is by taking turns. One person leads, then the other. You can both be right, just in different ways." Elon blinked. The simplicity of her words hit him hard. "Maybe you're right," he said softly. "But it's hard, Emily. We're talking about something that could change everything. And when the stakes are this high, it's hard to compromise." Emily looked up at him with those bright, unshakable eyes. "Sometimes, you don't have to compromise, Daddy. You just have to trust each other. And if you do that, maybe you'll see that you both want the same thing." It took several more days of conflict, frustration, and stalled progress before Elon and Dr. Saito came to a breakthrough. After one particularly heated argument, Elon took a step back and really listened. He realized that the problem wasn't about right or wrong. It was about trust. Dr. Saito wasn't trying to control the mission. She was trying to ensure it had a foundation strong enough to support the weight of its ambition. And Elon, in his usual way, was pushing the limits, not to be reckless, but to move the mission forward faster. Both perspectives were crucial, but they needed to find a way to make them work together. That night, Elon called Dr. Saito to his office. She arrived a few minutes later, her expression unreadable. He motioned for her to sit. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," Elon began. "Maybe you're right. We can't rush this. We have to build something that will stand the test of time, not just launch it into the sky and hope for the best." Dr. Saito raised an eyebrow. "You're willing to compromise?" "Not compromise," Elon corrected. "Collaborate. We'll take the calculated risks, but we'll do it with the foundation your team has built. Together, we can make something that will change everything." Dr. Saito nodded slowly. "I'm glad you're finally seeing it my way." Elon smiled wryly. "I think we've both been seeing it the same way, just from different angles." The days that followed saw a dramatic shift in the way SpaceX and Nova Aerospace approached the mission. While they still had differences, the mutual respect that grew between Elon and Dr. Saito made all the difference. The teams began to integrate more smoothly, each side learning from the other. Emily, with her unspoken wisdom, had been right all along. It wasn't about who led or who followed. It was about finding a balance. And with both Elon's vision and Dr. Sato's precision working together, the impossible was no longer out of reach. The partnership was no longer just a merger of companies. It had become a fusion of ideas, a shared dream that would take humanity to Mars and beyond. The tension between SpaceX and Nova Aerospace had finally begun to subside. After weeks of disagreements and stalled progress, Elon and Dr. Saito had found a fragile but promising understanding. They had agreed on a shared approach, blending SpaceX's bold vision with Nova's methodical precision. But even with this breakthrough, the pressure of what lay ahead weighed heavily on them both. With the first joint spacecraft scheduled for launch within 6 months, the stakes could not be higher. The project had become the most ambitious mission in human history, and failure was not an option. But the road to Mars was paved with more than just technical challenges. It was a test of leadership, vision, and trust. The first challenge was the spacecraft itself. With Nova's propulsion system at its core, the new design needed to integrate the best of both companies. SpaceX's engineers were responsible for the spacecraft's structure, while Nova focused on refining the propulsion system. Emily's input, which had been pivotal in earlier design discussions, was now more essential than ever. She had taken her childhood curiosity and turned it into something tangible, solving problems that no one her age should have been able to. As the spacecraft took shape, her ideas, still far beyond her years, were crucial in guiding the development. One afternoon, as the final design was unveiled, Elon stood at the front of the room, facing a group of engineers, scientists, and visionaries. Dr. Saito stood beside him, her usual calm demeanor replaced by an almost palpable excitement. Emily, as always, sat off to the side, quietly observing. "This," Elon said, motioning to the massive 3D hologram of the spacecraft, "is the future. This is what will get us to Mars faster than anyone thought possible. We've got the most advanced propulsion system on the planet. And with SpaceX's landing technology, we're not just getting there, we're coming home." The room fell into an awed silence, the design both beautiful and awe-inspiring. The sleek, aerodynamic lines of the spacecraft were a testament to the blending of two cultures, the boldness of SpaceX and the precision of Nova. The dual-stage rocket system, powered by Nova's propulsion technology, would reduce the time it took to travel to Mars by more than half. The landing technology developed by SpaceX would ensure the spacecraft could safely return, eliminating the primary hurdle for colonization. It was a marvel of engineering, an engineering feat born from the collaboration of two companies that had once been rivals, but were now united in their singular vision to change humanity's future. As news of the launch date spread, the world's attention turned to this extraordinary collaboration. News outlets, social media platforms, and pundits of all stripes weighed in. Public excitement was palpable. People were hungry for a vision that promised to push humanity beyond Earth's fragile atmosphere. Yet, not everyone was thrilled. There were detractors, critics who questioned whether Elon Musk, with his unrelenting ambition, could really pull this off. And then there was Nova, its technology hailed as revolutionary, but many wondered if it could really stand up to the intense scrutiny that came with such a high-profile mission. After all, Nova was still a relative newcomer to space technology, and many questioned its ability to maintain its groundbreaking work under the spotlight. Despite the criticism, Elon wasn't deterred. His confidence in the project, and in the team he had assembled, was unwavering. He believed in the technology, and he believed in the mission. More than that, he believed in the importance of inspiring the next generation to reach for the stars. His vision was clear. It wasn't just about Mars. It was about teaching the world to dream again. As the months passed, SpaceX's headquarters buzzed with activity. The countdown clock, ever present on the large digital display in the control room, ticked down relentlessly. The spacecraft, which had undergone rigorous testing and refinement, was nearly ready for its first test flight. Every component had been checked, rechecked, and verified multiple times. Now, the time for theory was over. The time for action had come. Elon paced nervously in his office, glancing at the clock. He knew he was in the final stretch. The mission was about to become a reality, but the pressure was immense. The launch would be broadcast live, watched by millions across the globe. Every detail had to go perfectly. He couldn't help but think back to the early days of SpaceX, the failures, the struggles, the endless hurdles. And yet, here he was, on the verge of one of the most significant achievements in human history. It had been a long and difficult road, but now everything was coming together. And then there was Emily. Every time he looked at her, he was reminded of why this mission was so important. Her wide-eyed curiosity and boundless imagination had shaped this project in ways that no one else could have. As the team prepared for launch, Emily was becoming more and more involved in the final stages. While her contributions had always been significant, they were now critical. She had spent hours analyzing the spacecraft systems, suggesting tweaks, and even making modifications that had impressed the engineering team. Elon had always trusted her instincts, but he had never fully realized just how much she had grown. She wasn't just his daughter anymore. She was a key player in the mission, a part of something much larger than either of them could have imagined. One evening, Elon sat down with her in her workshop. It was a quiet moment before the storm of activity that would follow. "Emily," Elon began, his voice unusually soft. "I know this is a huge thing, getting to Mars. It's not just about the spacecraft. It's about everything. You've already done so much, but I need to know. Do you think we're ready? Emily, who had been absorbed in her calculations, looked up at him with a seriousness that only a child of her extraordinary intelligence could possess. I think we're ready, she said, her voice firm. I've seen the designs, and I know the propulsion system will work. It's just a matter of doing it, and trusting the team to do their part. Elon smiled, feeling a deep pride in her words. He knew she was right. It wasn't about perfect designs or flawless technology. It was about trust. Trust in the team, trust in the vision, and trust in the future they were building together. The morning of the launch was filled with an electricity that crackled through the air. A sense of nervous anticipation enveloped the SpaceX headquarters. The control room was a blur of activity as engineers and scientists double-checked every system, ran through final simulations, and ensured that all systems were go. Elon stood before the cameras, a mix of excitement and anxiety in his eyes. Emily was beside him, holding his hand as they watched the countdown clock tick closer to 0. This is it, Elon said, his voice steady but full of emotion. We've worked our entire lives for this moment. The countdown began. T-minus 10 seconds. Elon felt the weight of history pressing down on him. It wasn't just the success of SpaceX or Nova. It was the success of every person who had ever dreamed of reaching the stars. It was humanity's first step toward Mars. T-minus 5 seconds. He glanced at Emily, who was staring at the rocket on the launch pad with wide eyes. Her excitement was palpable, her gaze fixed on the mission ahead. This wasn't just a dream. It was reality. 3, 2, 1. The engines ignited with a deafening roar, and the spacecraft blasted into the sky, leaving Earth behind. The crowd erupted into applause. It was the beginning of something unprecedented, something unimaginable. Humanity was on its way to Mars. The launch had been flawless. The spacecraft had lifted off from the launch pad with a roar, cutting through the atmosphere as if it was destined for greatness. Millions of people watched in awe as SpaceX and Nova Aerospace made history, proving that humanity's dream of reaching Mars was closer than ever. The atmosphere inside SpaceX headquarters was electric. High fives, hugs, and smiles everywhere. Elon's heart was racing with excitement as he watched the spacecraft soar into the heavens, but that excitement was fleeting. Hours after the successful launch, the team gathered for a debriefing. The mission was on track, the trajectory was solid, and the spacecraft was performing exactly as expected. But in the background, unbeknownst to the engineers and scientists celebrating the success, a tiny anomaly was brewing, one that could undermine everything they had worked for. It started as a minor fluctuation in the spacecraft's fuel system, nothing that couldn't be fixed, or so they thought. The team worked quickly to diagnose the issue, running a series of checks. For a brief moment, it seemed like an isolated incident, something easily corrected with a simple recalibration. However, as the hours passed, more unusual readings began to surface. The spacecraft communication systems were intermittently dropping, a problem that had never been detected during any of the previous tests. The propulsion system, while still functioning, seemed to be operating at slightly less efficiency than expected. The engineers were on high alert, but reassured themselves that these were typical glitches that could be resolved in time. It wasn't until the second day of the mission that the real scope of the problem began to emerge. The first real alarm came through during a routine systems check. Nova's propulsion engineers had been monitoring the spacecraft's ion thrusters, and the results were concerning. Despite the engine's nominal output, the system's performance was dropping faster than anticipated. Emily was the one to spot it first. She had been poring over the data, analyzing each system, each component, looking for any slight deviations. As she scanned the propulsion logs, her eyes widened. The fuel consumption rate was accelerating beyond what had been predicted, and more troubling, the trajectory had slightly shifted off course. Something's wrong, she murmured under her breath. She immediately contacted Dr. Saito, who was overseeing mission operations. What is it, Emily? Dr. Sato's voice crackled through the comms, tense but professional. I think there's an issue with the propulsion system. It's not just a minor glitch. The fuel usage is accelerating. The spacecraft is veering slightly off course, Emily replied, her voice calm but filled with urgency. Dr. Sato's mind raced. That's That's not supposed to happen. Have you cross-checked the calculations? Yes, Emily responded. Everything is consistent with the initial testing, but something's changed. I need to analyze the fuel system further. I think we might have an undetected flaw in the propulsion mechanism. Meanwhile, in the control room, Elon stood by a large monitor, watching the data stream in. His mind was consumed by the magnitude of what was unfolding. This wasn't just a routine mission anymore. They were in the midst of something that could either break new ground for humanity or lead to catastrophe. The pressure of it all settled on him like an iron weight. Maria, who had been keeping an eye on the spacecraft systems, turned to Elon. We might need to make an emergency course correction. This isn't just a glitch. The trajectory is shifting. Elon's heart sank. I know. We need to find out what's going on before it gets worse. Can you get Dr. Saito on the line? Maria immediately began typing, trying to reach Dr. Saito, but before she could, Emily's voice cut through the airwaves. I've isolated the problem. The propulsion system's fuel intake is failing. It's draining faster than we expected, and it's causing an imbalance in the thrusters. It's minor for now, but we're running out of time before it becomes a serious issue. Elon's mind raced, but he kept his voice steady. How long do we have before it becomes unmanageable? I'm not sure, Emily replied, her voice carrying a rare edge of anxiety. If we don't stabilize the fuel system within the next 24 hours, the spacecraft could be lost. It's already off course, and if it continues, we'll miss the Mars rendezvous. Elon's blood ran cold. The stakes had just risen to unimaginable heights. The next few hours were a blur. Engineers worked around the clock to assess the problem, but with every test they ran, new issues seemed to surface. It wasn't just a fuel problem. There were secondary failures happening in the spacecraft's electronics, as if something was gradually destabilizing the entire system. The spacecraft's ion engines were starting to misfire, sending the vessel spinning slightly off course. Back on Earth, the press began to catch wind of the issue. Speculation ran rampant. The once optimistic headlines about the successful launch began to turn dark. SpaceX's Mars mission in jeopardy. Nova's technology under scrutiny. Critics from every corner were quick to pounce. Elon paced nervously in his office, fingers tapping on the desk, his thoughts racing. He had built SpaceX from the ground up, weathered every failure, and always kept his focus on the bigger picture. But this was different. The idea of reaching Mars, of making history, now seemed distant, almost impossible. This wasn't just about technology anymore. This was about survival. As the hours wore on, Dr. Saito and her team worked tirelessly to come up with a solution. They had identified a critical malfunction in one of the spacecraft's core components, a pressure valve in the fuel system. If they could isolate and repair the valve remotely, they might be able to regain control. But the question was whether or not they could perform the repairs with the available resources in space. Emily, Dr. Saito said, voice tight with urgency. We need to try a manual repair. Can you access the valve remotely? I'll do my best, Emily responded. I'm going to need all the schematics. The system's not responding as expected, so I'm going to have to override some of the protocols. In the control room, Elon clenched his jaw. This was no longer just a mission, it was a race against time. Do whatever it takes to fix this. We're not letting this ship go down. Emily's hands flew over her tablet as she accessed the schematics. I have access to the repair protocols, but I'll need to bypass several safety systems. It's risky, but it's the only shot we've got. Do it, Elon commanded, his voice hardening with resolve. Hours passed as Emily worked on the spacecraft systems. Tension mounted in the control room as engineers scrambled to offer solutions, their voices growing more frantic with each passing minute. Dr. Sato's brow furrowed as she pored over data, her focus unbreakable. And then, in the dead of night, with just hours left before the critical systems failed entirely, Emily's voice crackled through the comms. It's done. I've bypassed the faulty valve, and the fuel intake is stabilizing. We're regaining control of the propulsion system. Elon exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. You did it, Emily, he said softly, the relief washing over him in waves. But even as the tension lifted, another reality began to set in. The spacecraft was back on course, but they had just survived a brush with disaster. The truth was inescapable. They had barely made it, and they were still a long way from Mars. As the spacecraft continued its journey toward Mars, the team's collective sigh of relief was tempered by the realization that they had narrowly avoided catastrophe. In the days that followed, the focus shifted back to refining the spacecraft systems, ensuring that the malfunction didn't happen again. But the damage had already been done. Public confidence had shaken, and the stakes were even higher than before. The road to Mars had just become a lot more treacherous. And though the spacecraft had regained its stability, the mission was far from safe. Elon stared at the vastness of the stars through the windows of his office. The question loomed over him. Could they really make it? Could they overcome the challenges still ahead? For now, they had survived. But the hardest part was yet to come. The mission to Mars was supposed to be humanity's crowning achievement. Yet, in the aftermath of the crisis, something had shifted. The mood at SpaceX had gone from electric celebration to a tense, almost suffocating atmosphere. Engineers, scientists, and even Elon Musk himself were grappling with the enormity of what had just transpired. They had barely escaped disaster, and the realization that they had come so close to failure was weighing heavily on everyone. For Emily, the pressure was even more palpable. Despite her calm and methodical approach to problem-solving, she wasn't immune to the stress of the mission. After all, she wasn't just playing a part in this story. She was one of its key architects. She had grown up with this dream. But now that she was on the brink of achieving it, the weight of the responsibility felt suffocating. Elon sat in his office late one night, staring out of the window at the lights of Hawthorne, California. His mind was racing, the events of the past few days running on an endless loop in his head. It had been too close. Too many things had gone wrong, and for a few terrifying moments, it had seemed like the mission would end before it had even really begun. But now, with the spacecraft back on course and everything stabilizing, the only thing that seemed to matter was the question that had been haunting him. What if it happened again? What if they didn't make it? Breathe, Musk, he muttered to himself. He knew the stakes. They had pushed the boundaries of technology and human capability. But he also knew that with every breakthrough, there was a cost. Every success carried the burden of its risks. His mind wandered back to the time before SpaceX had taken off, back to the countless failures, the skepticism, the moments when he wasn't sure he could make it. He had never let fear stop him then, and he wasn't about to let it stop him now. But now the fear was different. It wasn't just about rockets and engineering. It was about human lives, about legacy, about the future of a planet. Elon's phone buzzed on the desk. It was a message from Dr. Saito. Elon, we need to talk. Emergency systems have detected another anomaly. It's minor for now, but you need to see this. We can't afford any more surprises. The next morning, the team assembled for an urgent meeting in the war room. Dr. Saito, Emily, and Maria were all present, their faces taut with the strain of the past few days. We've detected another anomaly in the communication system, Dr. Saito began, her voice unusually terse. It's not as severe as last time, but it's a sign that something is still off. The spacecraft systems are operating under more stress than we anticipated. Elon rubbed his temples, the weight of the conversation settling on his shoulders. How long do we have before this becomes another problem? Not long, Dr. Saito replied. I think we have about 48 hours, at most. If we don't resolve the issue now, it could spread to other systems. And this time, I'm not sure we can fix it remotely. Emily, who had been quiet up until that point, spoke up. What if we reroute some of the backup power systems? The anomaly could be tied to a power distribution issue. It could be isolated. Elon looked at her, impressed. That's a good idea. Let's start there. But we need to be prepared for the worst. If this turns into a full systems failure, we need contingency plans. The urgency in his voice was clear, but beneath it, there was an underlying fear. One he hadn't shown anyone else. He had built his empire on resilience, on perseverance through adversity. But this mission was different. There were no second chances in space. A single failure could mean the end of everything they had worked for. Meanwhile, Emily was working in the command center, trying to isolate the problem from her end. Despite her usual composure, the pressure was starting to take a toll. The weight of being at the center of this project, of having to deliver time and again, was growing heavy. It wasn't just about solving problems anymore. It was about saving a mission that meant everything to her and to her father. She was tired, physically and emotionally. She had been working nonstop for days, analyzing data, suggesting solutions, constantly adapting to new challenges. But more than the fatigue, there was an undercurrent of doubt creeping into her thoughts. Could she really carry the weight of this mission on her shoulders? Could anyone? As the hours passed, the problem seemed to multiply rather than resolve. The spacecraft systems were showing more signs of instability, not less. Despite all the rerouting and backup systems they put in place, the anomaly persisted. She walked over to the observation window in the control room and looked out at the sprawling campus of SpaceX. There were so many people relying on her, on all of them, to make this mission a success. The weight of those expectations pressed down on her. But what if it wasn't enough? In a quiet moment, Elon came to the command center to check on the team. He noticed Emily standing by the window, deep in thought. He approached her slowly, as if trying to gauge the mood of the room. "How's it going, Emily?" he asked, his tone gentle. She turned to face him, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of something he hadn't expected: vulnerability. "I don't know, Dad," she said softly. "I'm doing everything I can, but it feels like it's never enough. What if it all falls apart? What if we don't make it?" Elon was taken aback by her honesty. He knew how strong she was, how sharp her mind was. But even she, with her incredible intelligence, couldn't escape the pressure of this mission. He placed a hand on her shoulder, the fatherly instinct kicking in. "We're not giving up," he said firmly. "We've been through worse. I've been through worse. We're not going to let fear control us now. We're not going to let this stop us." Emily nodded, her eyes filling with a mixture of relief and resolve. It was the reassurance she needed. But deep down, she knew that what Elon had said wasn't just about the mission. It was about them. The pressure they were facing was unlike anything they had ever experienced. And while their genius and determination had carried them this far, the question loomed larger every day. Could they push through the unknowns ahead? Elon, for all his outward confidence, found himself questioning the same things. In the quiet of his office later that night, he took a rare moment to reflect on the journey that had brought him to this point. It had been a long road, one filled with triumphs and failures, moments of glory and defeat. But the mission to Mars was different. This wasn't just a project. This was the future of humanity. It was about legacy. It was about his children, Emily, in particular, about showing them that they could achieve anything, no matter how impossible it seemed. And yet, as the days wore on, the constant pressure started to feel like an anchor pulling him under. The stakes were higher than they had ever been, and each failure, each misstep, carried consequences that no one, not even Elon Musk, could afford to ignore. As the countdown to the critical moment continued, the tension in the SpaceX control room was palpable. Emily, Dr. Saito, Maria, and the rest of the team were working around the clock to address the anomalies in the spacecraft systems. The mission's success was still within reach, but the path ahead was narrow. Every decision mattered, and every moment felt like it could be the last. For all the innovation, all the genius behind the project, it was clear now. This was not just a race against time to reach Mars. It was a battle against the unknown. And as the spacecraft continued on its journey, the team was forced to confront one painful truth: success or failure, they could not control the future. All they could do was keep moving forward. The spacecraft was drawing closer to Mars. As the days wore on, the team at SpaceX and Nova Aerospace had made remarkable progress in stabilizing the systems that had nearly collapsed just days earlier. But now, the mission was entering its most critical phase, one where every decision made could mean the difference between historic success and catastrophic failure. In the control room, the air was thick with anticipation. The spacecraft systems were holding steady, but there was no room for complacency. Everyone was on edge, and the pressure seemed to have intensified with each passing moment. It wasn't just the technical challenges anymore. It was the mental toll, the fear of making the wrong call, of not being able to get everything back on track in time. Emily, whose calm and focus had kept the team grounded through the earlier crises, now found herself pushing through an overwhelming wave of fatigue. She had barely slept in days, her eyes bloodshot and her thoughts scattered. But she couldn't afford to stop. Not now. Elon was there too, monitoring everything closely. His mind was a whirlwind of ideas and concerns, trying to keep track of all the data flowing in while also thinking about the bigger picture. He paced back and forth, occasionally stopping to check the spacecraft's telemetry on the monitors. But it wasn't the systems or the data that had Elon most concerned. It was the looming question: could they actually make it? Could they survive this final stretch and achieve the impossible? Just as the spacecraft approached Mars, another alarm flashed on the control panel. A ripple of anxiety spread through the room as engineers and scientists scrambled to assess the situation. Emily's hand flew to her console, eyes scanning the numbers. "We've lost the backup power supply," Emily said, her voice tight. "It's gone completely offline." The room fell silent for a moment. This wasn't just a minor glitch. The backup power was essential for maintaining the stability of the spacecraft systems. Without it, the risk of another failure was far too great. "What happened?" Dr. Saito asked, her voice urgent. "It's a wiring issue," Emily responded quickly, pulling up the diagnostics. "The main circuit for the backup power system has shorted out. It's not catastrophic, but it's critical. If we don't get this back online, the spacecraft could lose its primary power." Elon's heart raced. "How long will it take to fix?" "I can reroute power to the main circuits, but we'll need to perform a full diagnostic before I can restore backup systems. If anything goes wrong, we could lose control," Emily explained, her fingers dancing across the keyboard as she ran through the options. Elon stepped closer to her station. "Do it. We don't have a choice." The tension was unbearable as Emily worked furiously, the seconds feeling like hours. Her mind was sharp, but the exhaustion was starting to take its toll. She could feel the pressure building. She couldn't afford a single mistake. The fate of the mission, and everyone aboard, rested in her hands. With power redirected and backup systems temporarily shut down, the spacecraft was still operational, but the window of safety was growing smaller. The countdown to Mars was ticking relentlessly. The systems were stabilizing, but the mission was in jeopardy with each passing moment. Outside, the crew members in the control room could hear the constant buzz of activity, the sound of technicians speaking in hushed tones, and the soft hum of the spacecraft systems. Every sound seemed magnified in the tense atmosphere. Maria, who had been monitoring the spacecraft's trajectory, turned to Elon with a concerned look. "Elon, it's going to be close. If we don't get the backup power back online in the next few hours, we might not have enough time to finish the rest of the preparations for Mars orbit." Elon stood still for a moment, his face a mask of concentration. "What's the alternative?" "We'll have to enter Mars orbit without it," Maria replied. "It could cause severe instability, and we'd lose critical data. We'd be in a blind state for a while, and that's a risk I don't think we should take." There was no easy solution. For a brief moment, the room fell into a tense silence. "We don't have a choice," Elon said firmly, breaking the stillness. "We push forward." "Emily, can you get the backup power back online within the next few hours?" Emily nodded, though there was uncertainty in her expression. "I'll try." Despite the growing pressure, something inside Emily shifted. The deep exhaustion, the endless anxiety, and the doubt that had clouded her thoughts began to fade, replaced by a renewed sense of determination. This was what she had trained for. This was why she had fought so hard to be part of this mission. She wasn't just solving problems. She was shaping history. The human race was depending on her to overcome the impossible, and she would not fail. With a steady hand, Emily focused on the task at hand. She analyzed the wiring issue, running her diagnostics again, and finally identified the core problem: a short in the central power conduit that connected the backup system to the rest of the spacecraft's network. It was a delicate fix, but she knew exactly how to bypass the damaged circuits and restore the power. "There's a chance I can reroute the power manually," Emily said, speaking louder now, her confidence returning. "But I'll need to run a few tests first. I'll only have one shot at this." Dr. Saito leaned over Emily's shoulder, nodding in agreement. "Take your time. We need this to work." And so, Emily worked in the isolation of her station, running diagnostics, recalibrating the systems, and finally applying the fix. There were no shortcuts now. It was all or nothing. Elon watched her work, tension etched in every line of his face. He knew the stakes. They were running out of time. And yet, he felt a spark of hope that he hadn't felt in days. An hour passed. Then two. The team had moved into a silent, almost reverential mode, watching as Emily worked with laser focus. Finally, the lights in the control room dimmed slightly as the backup power supply came online. "It's working," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Power's back. The system is stable again." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. The spacecraft was back on track, once again holding steady as it approached Mars. Elon felt a weight lift off his shoulders, but the victory was bittersweet. They had survived the latest crisis, but there was no time for celebration. They were still in the final stretch, and there was still so much to do. "Great job, Emily," Elon said quietly. "We're not out of the woods yet, but this is a big win." Emily allowed herself a brief smile before turning back to the screens. The battle was far from over. She could feel it in her bones. As the spacecraft entered the orbit of Mars, the tension was palpable. The team had made it through the worst of the crises, but they were far from home. They were now entering the most dangerous phase of the mission. Every step had to be calculated. Every move had to be precise. Elon gathered the team in the war room for the final briefing. "We've been through a lot," he began. "But we're here now. We're in Mars orbit. What happens next will determine the future of humanity's space exploration efforts. We've got one shot to make it count." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room, making eye contact with Emily. "This is it. We go now." The room filled with a renewed sense of purpose. The systems were ready. The team was ready. They had come this far, and there was no turning back. The final push was coming. Mars was no longer a distant dream. It was within reach. And as the spacecraft moved into its final approach, there was only one thought on everyone's mind. Could they make history, or would they falter at the final hurdle? The spacecraft's descent toward Mars was unlike anything any of them had ever experienced. The atmosphere within the control room at SpaceX was thick with anticipation, every eye fixed on the screens that flickered with real-time data from the ship. The mission had reached the point of no return. All the calculations, the sleepless nights, the moments of doubt, it had all come down to this final stretch. Emily stood at the helm, her fingers poised above the controls, her mind a whirlwind of numbers, variables, and potential risks. Despite the exhaustion weighing heavily on her, she was calm, almost eerily so. The gravity of the situation had settled into her bones, but there was no turning back now. They were on the verge of making history. Mars was within their grasp. Elon, standing beside her, watched her closely. She was more than ready for this moment. He knew that. But what struck him was the transformation he had witnessed in his daughter over the course of this mission. She had grown, not just in intellect but in resilience. She had become the rock of this mission, holding together the team when the pressure threatened to shatter them. "How's the descent looking?" Elon asked, his voice steady but filled with unspoken concern. "It's a little bumpy, but we're stabilizing," Emily responded, her voice even. "I've got the angle adjustments under control. We're going to make it." She didn't need to look at him to feel his pride. She could hear it in his voice. And she knew that the weight of this mission was just as heavy on his shoulders. For Elon, this was more than a dream. It was the realization of a vision he had spent decades chasing. But now, as they came so close, it was all about the future. Of humankind, of her, of their legacy. The spacecraft's descent toward Mars was a delicate process, and every second felt like an eternity. Emily monitored the data carefully, recalibrating the thrusters and adjusting the trajectory with precision. Mars' gravity was unlike Earth's, more unpredictable, more volatile. The thin atmosphere didn't offer much in the way of slowing down, so they had to rely on a combination of heat shields, retrothrusters, and sheer precision to avoid crashing. Everything seemed to be going according to plan until... Warning! Temperature exceeding limits, 5% over threshold. The onboard system chimed, flashing red. The spacecraft's heat shields were starting to overheat from the intensity of the descent. Emily's heart skipped a beat. They had prepared for this. But seeing the numbers climb beyond acceptable levels was still a shock to the system. "Elon," she called out, her voice tight. "We're pushing the heat shields to their limits. If we don't cut back on the speed, we're going to lose them." Elon's face turned grim. This was one of the worst-case scenarios they had all prepared for. If the heat shields failed, the spacecraft would disintegrate upon impact with the Martian surface. He didn't hesitate. "Adjust the descent angle, immediately." Emily's fingers flew over the controls, her mind working in hyperdrive. She had only seconds to correct the trajectory before they reached a critical point. The calculations flashed before her, and she made the necessary adjustments, slowing the descent just enough to allow the heat shields to cool. The temperature began to drop slowly, stabilizing just below critical. They had bought themselves a little more time. "We're through the worst of it," Emily said, the relief in her voice barely detectable, as if she were afraid to fully believe it. But the descent was far from over. The hardest part was still to come. As the craft neared the Martian surface, every sensor was fully engaged. The landing zone was in sight, a vast, barren landscape of rust-colored dust and rock. There were no second chances here. The coordinates had been calculated with the utmost precision, but nothing was certain in space. Maria, who had been working in the background monitoring communications, turned to Elon with a look of concern. "We've got one last window to make the final adjustments. We need to go by the book. Every maneuver, every second counts." "Emily, you've got this," Elon said quietly, looking at her. "We're right there. We're doing it." Emily barely looked up from the screens. She was too focused. This moment had been her dream for as long as she could remember, but the pressure had transformed her into someone beyond her years. There was no room for mistakes, no room for hesitation. With one final command, Emily guided the spacecraft through the final stretch. The retrothrusters fired, and the lander began to descend slowly, cautiously, as they broke through the thin Martian atmosphere. 500 meters, 300, 200. The countdown began on the automated systems. Her heart raced in sync with the numbers. Every second stretched on forever. At 50 meters, the thrusters fired again, slowing their descent even further. "Here we go," Emily muttered to herself, holding her breath. The final meters passed in what felt like slow motion. The spacecraft's landing gear deployed, absorbing the force of the touchdown. The moment their feet hit the Martian soil, a powerful silence descended on the room. And then, the systems beeped. "Touchdown confirmed," Maria shouted. "We did it. We're on Mars." The room erupted in cheers. For a few brief moments, everyone in the control room at SpaceX stood still, processing the enormity of what had just happened. After years of planning, decades of ambition, the impossible had been achieved. But for Elon and Emily, it was different. As the celebrations rang out around them, they shared a quiet moment of recognition. Their eyes met, and without a word spoken, they knew. This was just the beginning. "We did it," Elon said, a soft smile on his face. "You did it, Emily. I'm proud of you." Emily's tired eyes softened for a moment. "We did it, Dad. Together." Despite the exhaustion, despite the fears that had haunted them through the darkest moments, they had made it. The spacecraft was safe. The landing was successful. Mars was theirs. Later, as the dust of the landing settled and the team began to execute the post-landing operations, Elon and Emily stood alone outside the Mission Control Center. The night sky over Hawthorne was clear, the stars twinkling above them. "Elon, I have to ask," Emily said, her voice hesitant. "What happens now? What does the future look like?" Elon turned to face her, his gaze distant. "The future? It's all just beginning. We've made history today, but this is just the first step. Our mission was never just to land on Mars. It's about building a future there. A new world, a new home for humanity." He looked at her, his eyes filled with both pride and an unshakable drive. "I've spent my whole life chasing impossible dreams, Emily. But now, it's your turn. This is your legacy, too. Mars isn't the final frontier. It's just the start." Emily looked up at the stars, feeling the weight of her father's words. There was so much left to do. This mission was just the first chapter in a long story. The dream of colonizing Mars, of transforming humanity's future, of creating a new home for people beyond Earth, was more real than ever, and she was ready to help lead the way. As the sun rose over the Martian horizon, casting long shadows across the alien landscape, the SpaceX crew on Mars began to set up their base camp. The first step had been taken. The technology, the teamwork, the sacrifice. It had all led to this moment. Back on Earth, the world watched in awe, knowing that the future had arrived. The mission was a resounding success, but what followed would be even greater. SpaceX, Nova Aerospace, and the entire team had proven that anything was possible if you dared to dream. And for Elon, Emily, and everyone involved, the real work had only just begun. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?